Hello, a very good afternoon. Welcome back to Downing Street. This is home from tomorrow to Liz Truss. She will be Britain's next Prime Minister after being declared the winner of the Conservative Party leadership contest. She beat her rival Rishi Sunak by more than 20,000 votes. She took 57% of the vote of Conservative Party members. She says she campaigned as a Conservative and will govern as a Conservative and deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow the economy. And she promised to deliver on help with energy bills and on the NHS. Well, tomorrow she will travel to meet the Queen at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire to complete the transfer of power. That will bring Boris Johnson's three-year premiership to an end. Well, the Prime Minister congratulated his successor on what he called her decisive win, saying she has the right plan to tackle the cost of living crisis, unite our party and continue the great work of uniting and levelling up our country. Now is the time for all Conservatives to get behind her 100%. Well, we'll have continuing reaction and analysis in this hour. First, let's have this report from our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's been following all the day's developments.
Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak together as candidates for the last time. The votes of Conservative members already counted, the winner already decided. To a packed hall in Westminster, the man overseeing the contest announced the final result.
Rishi Sunak, 60,399. Liz Truss, 81,326. Therefore, I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. We'll come up on stage.
For Liz Truss, a victory speech.
During this leadership campaign, I campaigned as a Conservative and I will govern as a Conservative. And my friends, we need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
And she paid tribute to the man she's about to replace.
Boris, you got Brexit done. You crushed Jeremy Corbyn. You rolled out the vaccine and you stood up to Vladimir Putin. You were admired from Kiev to Carlisle.
The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak had led the initial ballot of Conservative MPs. His defeat when voting was widened out to the members had been predicted, but the result was closer than some had expected. Liz Truss now has the top job in her party, which she will need to reunite after a bruising contest.
We all need to turn our attention very swiftly to supporting the new Prime Minister and her new team in delivering for the British people, and particularly now with everything we've got going on, particularly with inflation and cost of living, the challenges that they present. I think that's what the public will expect, and I think that's what everyone, myself included, will do.
And tomorrow, she moves in here, taking the top job in the country, with a to-do list arguably more challenging than any recent Prime Minister. As the Labour leader on a visit to a school in North London was quick to point out.
She needs to deal with the cost of living crisis, she needs to deal with the fact the NHS is on its knees, and she needs to deal with the collapse of law and order. And there can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
There's been criticism of how long this contest has taken to appoint a new leader. Nominations among MPs opened 8 weeks ago, and critics say that's left a vacuum at a crucial time when people are facing soaring costs. Liz Truss has promised she will move quickly and will set out her plans for help within days of taking office. She may be enjoying this moment, but the hard work starts now. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
And I've been talking about that victory and some of that hard work with our political correspondent, Nick Eardley.
the scale of the challenge she's facing as Prime Minister, Jane, is pretty unique. You know, you think of recent Prime Ministers, they all had their challenges, but even Theresa May and Boris Johnson, who had the massive Brexit battles in Parliament, they had a few weeks and in some cases a few months to try and win over Parliament and the public with their plan. Liz Truss has about 48 hours before she has to set out a plan that the early part of her premiership will be judged by. Now, I do think she's going to come up with a big plan. The chances are she's going to spend a lot of money on helping people with the cost of living. We know she's promised cuts to national insurance payments. She's promised to cut the green levies that we face on energy bills. But it's what she does in terms of intervening on bills that I think is going to be the big moment for Liz Truss this week. There is some talk that she may go as far as a price freeze. That's something that some energy companies have been lobbying for. They seem to be optimistic that she might be coming round to something approaching a price freeze over the winter months. But that's what some Tory MPs are going to judge her on. More importantly, though, Jane, you know, she's been speaking to the Conservative Party for the past 2 months. It's the public who will ultimately judge Liz Truss in a general election. And I think you'll start to see her when she takes over in Downing Street tomorrow and as she goes through this week with Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday and potentially this speech on Thursday setting out her energy plans. That's the point at which she has to pivot to talking to the public, and that energy plan is going to be absolutely crucial.
Nick Eardley, our chief political correspondent there. Well, let's talk first of all to the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. He is MP for Bournemouth East. He chairs the Commons Defence Select Committee. You may remember he had the whip removed, in fact, by Boris Johnson after failing to vote in the confidence vote back in July. Tobias Ellwood, thanks so much for talking to us here this afternoon. Well, your thoughts, first of all, about Liz Truss, her victory. 57% of the Conservative Party members is what she got. What do you think?
Faces our new Prime Minister. So firstly, congratulations to Liz Truss on her success. You're also going to be hearing a lot from Conservative MPs to say how important it is for us to unite around and support her. We need some short-term solutions to get us through this very difficult winter and a longer-term strategy to move our nation forward. I think we're going to come up with those solutions, but what's critical for me is the makeup, the complexion, the personality, the tone, and indeed the conduct of this cabinet and indeed this government. I just stress and I hope that we're going to reach right across our party to unite the various tribes, the various caucuses, the various groups to provide a coalition government, if you like, within the Conservatives that can answer those questions. Because looking back in our past, the great Prime Ministers, Conservative Prime Ministers you can remember, are the ones that actually conducted themselves just from the centre right, and that's where I hope that we'll go.
I mean, it's really interesting that you've used the word unite twice there already, and I have to say it is a word that has been used so many times today from different quarters. Is the reason that so many Conservatives appear to be using that word, wanting unity, is that because the last couple of months have been a particularly bruising leadership campaign?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen, I'm afraid, individuals take chunks out of each other, too much blue on blue. But also I think there's been a little bit of a tussle for the soul of the party over the last few years. We've got a couple of years to rectify this. We've got a couple of years to solve this before the next general election. We can do this if, again, going back to those big beasts, the prime ministers that we can remember are the ones that faced a crisis, not only answered the crisis, but then actually shunted our nation forward. That's exactly what we've got to do now. What happens over the next few days and indeed weeks will set the tone as to how we will actually approach these challenges and ultimately whether we'll win the next general election.
Right, I mean, tone, I mean, that's interesting as well. Again, it is striking how many Conservatives today and political analysts have said Liz Truss has to get the cost of living issue right. There has to be help on energy prices in particular, and if she doesn't get that right, the Conservatives won't win the next general election. Is it absolutely that basic to your mind? Is that the overwhelming issue?
The issue is, I think, divided in half. You've got firstly the solution itself and then the delivery, how you implement that. And that can only happen if the entire Conservative Party buys in to where we actually want to go. And then the nation sees that. And then we have that mandate to make those tough decisions, which the nation will then support. If we ourselves are seen as divided, if we ourselves can't agree on what the solutions are, then we will be punished in the next general election and we will lose the right to continue in staying in number 10.
Very interesting to hear your perspective. Thanks so much. That's Tobias Ellwood, the chair of the Defence Select Committee. We're going to be talking to Labour in the next few minutes, but let's just take a minute or two as well to remind ourselves of these huge challenges really facing Liz Truss. First and foremost, cost of living crisis and energy bills, as we've already touched on. A word about inflation. That currently stands at above 10%. There have been forecasts that it could hit 13% this winter. Rising inflation is usually tackled by increasing interest rates, which the Bank of England has now done on 6 consecutive occasions. They now stand today at 1 3/4%. The bank is hoping that that will encourage people to save. But of course, it does mean that some people see their mortgages go up, those monthly payments go up. And the biggest factor affecting households up and down the country, as we keep saying, inevitably, I know we're repeating ourselves, but it is that issue of rising energy bills. We've been asking people in Birmingham about their main concerns.
Everything's to do with the cost of living, isn't it? Everything's gone up, nothing's coming down.
Us pensioners, we're struggling. My bills have gone double now. My electric and gas from £90 to £130 to £250.
We keep talking, do we choose to eat or heat? That is the reality. We are going to struggle. And prices are ridiculous. My bills have gone up threefold.
Everything is skyrocketing and people need to live lives and people have to cut down on essentials.
The economy and the prices of gas and electric and getting people out of poverty. I think that's the main thing to focus on right now.
So again, there we have a sense inevitably of the issues that are facing people, and I know we keep saying that phrase, cost of living, we keep talking about energy bills, but of course it is the pressing issue, as all our conversations up and down the country have shown us. Let's get reaction to the election of Liz Truss from Labour. I'm joined by Labour's Wes Streeting. He is Shadow Health Secretary, of course. Wes Streeting, thanks for being with us this afternoon. Your thoughts about who the new Prime Minister will be from tomorrow?
Well, don't apologise for continuing to talk about the cost of living. We unapologetically are talking about the cost of living because it is the single biggest issue facing our country and the very first issue that the new Prime Minister needs to get to grips with, because of all the things we've seen this summer with the rumbling on of the Conservative Party leadership contest, I think the most unforgivable thing is that we've had a government in place, a Prime Minister, a Chancellor and all the rest of them, and they've done precisely nothing on the cost of living, on energy bills, or indeed the other big crisis in the country, the crisis facing the NHS. So Liz Truss has got a lot of work to do. But I've got to say at this stage, after 12 years of Conservative government that's delivered low growth, record high taxes, crumbling public services, and now this cost of living crisis, it's a bit like calling on the arsonist to put out the fire. And I don't have confidence that she or her government will have the wherewithal, as she puts it, to deal with these crises, which are ultimately of the Conservatives' own making.
I mean, there are suggestions that we may hear something as soon as Thursday on energy bills, even possibly talk of, for example, freezing the energy price cap, a policy not a million miles away from what Sir Keir Starmer's been saying. So you would presumably be quite happy about that.
I'd love Liz Truss to nick our policy. I mean, one of the interesting things about the front pages of today's papers is that she seems to agree with Labour that we need to freeze energy prices, but she's now tying herself up in knots trying to find any other means than a windfall tax on oil and gas companies, which, to be honest, is a bit daft. I think that is a perfectly fair way of funding the policy, taxing those excess profits of oil and gas companies, and to deliver something that would help everyone in our country. And of course there would be, under our plan, some additional support for pensioners and people on the lowest incomes, recognising that they are hardest up. But I think most people in this country at the moment are looking at their rising bills, looking at their bank balances, their income, their outgoings, and I think people are beginning to really worry. So I hope that action does come this week. It's action that should have come sooner. But look, if Liz Truss nicks our policy, we're not going to be churlish about it. It's a fully costed, thought-through policy, and she's welcome to take it for the benefit of the people.
Wes Streeting, thank you so much, Labour MP, Shadow Health Secretary, and well, we wait to see what indeed may be announced, perhaps a little later in the week. That is the story that is dominating, but of course the war in Ukraine continues. That ties in with energy prices as well, as we know, and the UK has been one of Ukraine's most stalwart backers since Russia invaded 6 months ago. President Zelensky and Boris Johnson enjoyed a close relationship. What could a new Prime Minister mean for the war in Ukraine? Let's talk to our security correspondent, Frank Gardner, because he joins me from Kyiv. Well, I have to question to what extent everything that we're discussing here in Westminster, Frank, is really being talked about where you are. There's far more desperate and pressing issues. But in a broad terms, what difference could it make to see Liz Truss as Prime Minister?
Well, Ukrainians are hoping that it's going to make no difference at all. And in fact, there's already been a statement from the Ukrainian parliament saying that they welcome her appointment. She was the candidate of choice, I think, for them, because they feel confident that she is pretty robust, that she is going to continue the policies of Boris Johnson when it comes to supporting this country, Ukraine, in its fight against the Russian invasion. Already, Ukrainian bloggers have been circulating a kind of mocked-up, rather romanticized picture of Liz Truss clad in shiny black armor, calling her Nova Zalizna Lady, meaning new Iron Lady. They see her very much as a reincarnation of a kind of tough Mrs. Thatcher, Lady Thatcher, when it comes to foreign policy. This doesn't feel here in the streets of Kyiv, the capital, as a country at war. But when you go further south, which I've been doing recently, down near the Russian front lines, it is very much a country at war that is fighting for its survival. And they are enormously grateful here for Britain's help, both military, but diplomatic and political as well. And I think they're acutely aware that as the winter grinds on, and as many Britons are going to start shivering because they can't afford to pay their energy bills, that there will be some people questioning, is it worth it? Why is Britain supporting this fight against Putin? Isn't it time to make some kind of compromise? And Ukrainians, I think, particularly the government here, are nervous that Europe is going to lose its resolve, lose its will, and start pressing them to make a compromise deal which will allow Putin to seize the land that he's already taken and then regroup and then take more of it.
All right, Frank, thank you so much for now. Our security correspondent, Frank Gardner there, who is in Ukraine's capital. Let's turn to Brussels and get the view of, get a sense of what sort of reaction there is there in Brussels. Our Europe correspondent is Jessica Parker, who joins me from there. To what extent now, Jessica, do politicians and bureaucrats in Brussels, to what extent are they interested in who the British Prime Minister is right now?
I think they're interested. Of course, there are some outstanding issues, things that haven't been settled after Brexit, particularly the Northern Ireland Protocol, post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland. So they're very interested in that regard. But, as you allude to, really the talk of the town here isn't the new UK Prime Minister, although it's being mentioned here and there. It's very much the energy crisis, especially after that key gas pipeline, Nord Stream 1, it was closed for an indefinite period, or it remained closed for an indefinite period as of Saturday morning. So that's really what's at the forefront of their minds at the moment. But if you look at some of the congratulatory tweets coming out from people like the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, I was just in a press conference with the EU Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell. The thing they tend to hone in on here is they say they want a good relationship with the United Kingdom, but want the UK to, as they would put it, fully comply with those agreements that were signed during the Brexit process, namely the withdrawal agreement and the Northern Ireland Protocol. Of course, Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary as she was, now she's on course to be the new UK Prime Minister, the political architect of legislation that could potentially override parts of that treaty which the UK signed the agreement but which the UK says isn't working. So I think that's the kind of immediate issue. Will there be fresh talks on the Northern Ireland Protocol? The EU saying its door is open. What will Liz Truss do? The suggestion has been so far she's going to press ahead with that legislation, but could you in parallel see a return to some sort of dialogue? That's something to watch out for over the coming days.
Yes, we wait to see. Thanks very much, Jessica Parker there in Brussels. We're going to be talking a little bit more about Northern Ireland after past. But right now, let's talk to another Conservative, someone who supported Rishi Sunak. Let's hear from someone who was behind the former Chancellor for the leadership. The MP Andrew Bridgen joins me, MP for North West Leicestershire. Good afternoon to you. Disappointing day for you?
Yes, but not expected, and the result was far closer than the polls had suggested, which didn't come as a surprise. But clearly Liz Truss has got a mandate from the membership of the party, and it's now incumbent on all Conservative MPs to rally behind the new Prime Minister. We face huge challenges, as you're all too aware, the cost of living crisis, the situation in Ukraine ongoing, and I really don't think the country would forgive us if we didn't rally round now.
Yes, and people are losing track of the number of Conservatives who are using the word unite today. Is your opinion that the party really is quite fractured after quite a bitter blue-on-blue campaign over the last couple of months? Is there a lot of restoration work to be done?
There is some restoration work to be done. I think the campaign went on 2 weeks too long. I think we could have done it 2 weeks earlier, in which case we'd be in a different position today, but we are where we are. I think the fact that it was 57-43 and not 65-35 means it's more important than ever that Liz Truss appoints a cabinet and a government from across the spectrum of the Conservative Party, and that would be a very healthy thing to do.
Yes, I mean, is there any role anywhere for Rishi Sunak? What's your man going to do now?
Well, Rishi's a very capable politician. He proved that during the leadership debates, and also he's extremely energetic. I hope there's a place for Rishi in the government, and I certainly hope there's a place for him to stay in Parliament. I think he would be a huge loss to the party. At the end of the day, that's Liz Truss's decision, and she's got some big decisions to make. I think whether Rishi lost the leadership election, but I think he won the argument about supporting the country through this winter and the energy crisis. I think we'll have a credible policy within a week, which will entail a price freeze for energy, giving certainty to consumers and also to businesses. It'll reduce the impact of inflation, means interest rates won't have to go as high to control inflation. And I think that's a policy that you'll see repeated across in North America and in the rest of Europe as time goes on.
Andrew Bridgen, thank you very much for now. We'll see what the next few days bring. Andrew Bridgen, Conservative MP there, a Leicestershire MP. And as he and so many others have been reflecting today, Liz Truss is going to inherit one of the most difficult economic challenges in decades. Our business correspondent, Nina Warhurst, has more on that.
Welcome to Leeds Kirkgate Market. You know, there are days when the happenings of Westminster can feel a million miles away from places like this. Not today. 600 stalls, the biggest covered indoor market in Europe. Have a look up there. It's been going for more than 150 years, and this place, well, it wants to keep on thriving. The challenge for the new Prime Minister is to protect, support and help businesses while inflation is at above 10%, while interest rates are going up. Let's have a chat then about what it's looking like for businesses. Martin is from the Federation of Small Businesses. Have you ever known it so challenging for them?
No, I've been in business 35 years and this is as bad as it's ever been. There's a lot of businesses hanging on by their fingernails. Taxes are really high, demand's low and cash is running out. We need urgent action from government now.
What would that look like?
Well, we know that there are the biggest things that hurt businesses are the taxes that apply before they make any profit. So that's things like business rates, national insurance. We need the government to recognise that the current energy bills and these kind of taxes are really hurting.
And what you said to me earlier is whatever happens, it needs to happen now. Let's talk to Phil, who runs a bookstore on the High Street. It's been in the family for nearly 30 years. Challenging times, though. What do you need to see?
I think it's a debate about the local economy. It's extremely precarious, even coming out of the lockdown period. The traditional nature of the high street hasn't been properly discussed. There's been no long-term strategy for it. I think in terms of specifics, we'd look at an overhaul of the business rates, particularly for small businesses, a lowering of VAT. It's an indirect tax that's affecting everybody's ability to spend at the moment. Clearly we need some certainty over our overheads with heating and lighting and things like that, and the cost of living crisis is going to make everybody's product become a luxury, and that's the problem for us.
Can you afford that book if you can't afford to heat your house, of course? Levelling up, does that mean anything? Has that meant anything?
Sadly not. It's another of those list of promises that have never been fulfilled. I think you can add Northern Powerhouse to that, which became a couple of words with nothing really behind it. I think we do feel a little disenfranchised up here. We're at the home of where Marks and Spencer started, at a stall just down from us, and you just wonder, would they have been able to put up with some of the things that we are now having to give them the longevity that they've had.
Fingers crossed for a fourth decade. Thank you, Phil. And Mary works in the care sector. Let's find out from her the pressure that you've been under. You said to me earlier, it's at crunch point, it's at breaking point. Do you foresee more carers leaving unless something changes?
Yes. One of the carers, a fabulous carer that looked after my mum, she's gone and got a job in Marks and Spencer's because she sees more of a future, that they look after her better, and she was brilliant at her job. And we've got to ask, how can we allow that to happen? That retail is a more exciting job, gives you more benefits than looking after some most vulnerable people in our society. So the government have to recognise that if social care breaks, then the NHS breaks and everything around it. So they need to look at putting funding in, protecting the unpaid carers that mesh all that together, look after them financially, but also emotionally. The mental health system is broken and people don't realise what it's like, and it's about time that a Prime Minister who's been part of a government who's absolutely wrecked social care gets a grip and looks after the people that look after the most vulnerable in our society.
Thank you, Mary. And we wait to see. Both candidates have, of course, pledged that they will address funding in the NHS and in social care. You can't overstate the scale of the challenge for the next Prime Minister. The pound has been wobbling, debt is at a record high, and the energy fluctuations, well, that's outside of their control. It's been a long and gruelling campaign, but in some ways, the real work starts now.
Nina Warhurst there in Leeds, and yes, doesn't it? Well, let's try to get a flavour of what's going to be happening now in the coming days in the Downing Street communications team. Let's talk to Mo Hussein, who is former head of press at Number 10. Good afternoon. Good to talk to you again, Mo. So many things in the in tray. What would be happening actually right now? Tell us what conversations could be happening today, because of course Liz Truss not officially PM until tomorrow, but what will be going on right now?
Right now, there'll be a lot of preparation for the new Prime Minister and her team, the day one briefings, what are the main issues that she needs to be kept up to speed on and make decisions on, and then what about issues across government in terms of departmental work that may not involve Number 10 directly, but she will have a say on. And I think you'll see a big shift between campaigning and governing. So in the campaign, we've heard various things that the next Prime Minister may do, and we haven't had that much detail on some of the biggest issues facing the country, like the cost of living crisis or energy bills rising. When you get into government, you have to prioritise. You can't do all the things that you said you will do. You've got to pick the top 2 or 3 issues facing the country and really go big on them. And I think that's where a lot of the focus and the time and resource will be spent on, and we will see that, I think, on the energy announcement expected later this week.
Yes, I mean, will she have had people around her who actually will have been thinking about some of that, planning that, drawing up documents actually over the last couple of weeks? Because there's been a sense for some time that she was going to win. Will there have been people pulled aside to say, right, we think it's us, we think we're going to win, start working on energy bills, start coming up with a plan?
Yes, definitely, because you'll have people on the campaign who will be doing the day-to-day firefighting, the day-to-day, how is the campaign looking, what more do we need to do, and then you'll have the transition to government team. So when the job actually starts, how are you going to get through the first 100 days or so, and more importantly, the first week, and what do you say to the answers, the questions that people are asking that you can't really answer on the campaign trail, because you obviously want to keep your powder dry a bit, you don't want to fully commit to anything, you can hide behind I'm not in the job yet, I don't want to preempt, I haven't seen all the data, I haven't got all the facts. You can't really do that once you're the Prime Minister. So she will have had her team thinking about these scenarios and thinking about what she can do and having conversations perhaps with the existing civil service, perhaps with business groups on what policy we can arrive at in terms of helping people in the face of the cost of living crisis.
All right, Mo. Well, I'm sorry we have to let you go because it's always so interesting to hear your perspective as someone who's very much been at the heart of all of this. I hope perhaps we can talk again in the next few days. Thank you so much, Mo Hussein, who used to be head of comms here at Number 10, really knows how it all works. And interesting that he talked about business as well. We're hoping to talk to the CBI later in this hour. Well, we're all getting to know Liz Truss a little more over the coming weeks and months. What do we know already about the politician who is about to become Britain's third female Prime Minister? Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, takes a look.
She's a grafter. She means what she says, she knows what she wants, and she gets it.
These are some of Liz Truss's most supportive friends. Activists in her Norfolk constituency have nothing but praise for their MP, the next Prime Minister.
The job is so important to her, getting done what she wants to get done.
There's no airs and graces about Liz. She's just, as you see,
she's got the skin of a rhinoceros when it comes to putting up with people having a go at her, I can assure you.
Several times over the years, colleagues have predicted that Liz Truss's career was on a downward path, that she'd soon be spending more time here in Norfolk than in Westminster. But friends say she's always been underestimated, and her survival is evidence of a clever politician with a steely determination. Her political journey has taken her from a family she describes as left-wing, where she joined her parents in the campaign for unilateral nuclear disarmament, to Oxford University, where she was a Liberal Democrat and took to the conference stage to argue in favour of abolishing the monarchy.
We Liberal Democrats believe in opportunity for all. We believe in fairness and common sense.
After graduating, she joined the Conservatives, worked as an accountant and was selected to fight the safe Tory seat of South West Norfolk. But her political career was almost derailed when news emerged of an affair with an MP. She fought off attempts to oust her and was elected to Parliament in 2010. She was quickly promoted first to Education Minister. Those who worked with her back then say she was always across the detail.
One of the things that successful teams need is someone who really believes in an idea, and Liz really believes in a lot of very big ideas. When I worked for her, we called her the Minister for Maths, and this was a real focal point. She can create a team through her beliefs, through her passion, through her evangelism for important ideas.
Her first cabinet job was Environment Secretary. It was obvious, though, that some work would be needed on her presentational skills.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Liz.
When the Brexit referendum was called, she campaigned to stay in the EU, something she later said was wrong. Nicola Horlick, a Liberal Democrat, was part of that Remain team.
For somebody to say, you know, I had this conviction about one thing and the next day, actually, I was wrong about that and I've now got a different conviction. When it seems that that's just about getting power, that really concerns me.
You don't agree with Liz Truss on lots of things. Do you think she's got any qualities that would make her a decent Prime Minister?
You've got this person who's very disciplined, very well organised, but is lacking on the communication and charisma side.
But friends say she does know how to get her message across, and her Instagram posts show her playful side. Ruder colleagues think her love of a photo opportunity betrays a superficiality. She was certainly mocked for this regal pose last Christmas. Her promotion to Foreign Secretary has given her a global platform. Some think there are less than subtle echoes of Margaret Thatcher, a comparison she loves. Liz Truss will be Britain's third female Prime Minister. Life for her, her husband and 2 daughters is about to change, and no one's underestimating the challenges that lie ahead. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
And again, let's talk about those challenges with the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, who joins me from our other position at Westminster this afternoon. Sir Ed Davey, your thoughts about what Liz Truss needs to do and say in the coming days and weeks?
We'll be listening to Liz Truss over the summer, and nothing I've heard from her or the Conservatives suggests that she has a plan to tackle the crisis facing the British people. There's no plan to deal with the rising energy bills, the rocketing food bills, the crisis of the NHS. And that's deeply alarming. She doesn't seem to get the scale of the crisis or doesn't care. That's why Liberal Democrats believe the best way forward is to get the Conservatives out of government.
I mean, isn't it too early, though, to say that she doesn't get it? Because we just don't know yet. And there is talk, I'm sure, that there may be an announcement around energy bills perhaps as early as Thursday. So presumably you would welcome it if she came out and offered help to families.
Well, she's had plenty of time to set out that help before now, and she's failed to do that. Liberal Democrats have argued over the summer. We were the first party to argue for a freeze in the price cap, so prices don't go up as proposed this autumn, and to fund that with a windfall tax on the oil and gas companies who are making tens of billions of pounds of profit because President Putin invaded Ukraine. That seems a fair and moral thing to do, but the Conservatives haven't done that, and Liz Truss has said she's against that. So we will obviously listen to what she says, but so far she appears to have no plan whatsoever, just doesn't seem to care.
One thing she did talk about a lot during the campaign over the summer was growth. She said Britain's growth was woeful, really. My word, not hers. But you will know that she is adamant that growth in this country has to be improved. That appears to be her mantra. I mean, does she have a point there?
Well, she has a point because the Conservatives' government record on growth is lamentable. It is woeful, as she said. The economy has been growing very poorly. That's meant that millions of families are worse off and businesses are struggling. We do need some policies for growth. But I'm afraid I've heard nothing from Liz Truss or the Conservatives to suggest they have a credible plan for growth. And indeed, many of her policies would actually get in the way of growth. So, Liberal Democrats want a strong economy. We want to make sure we are having a much fairer society. We want to make sure that we are giving people opportunities to get on. But Liz Truss doesn't seem to have that sort of plan.
Sir Ed Davey, many thanks for joining us, leader of the Liberal Democrats, of course, talking to me from outside Parliament there. So plenty on the desk as soon as Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. That happens officially tomorrow, of course. Let's just remind you of the timeline of events. Boris Johnson has to tender his resignation formally tomorrow to the Queen. That break with tradition that we've been reflecting on. He will be going to Balmoral to do that in Aberdeenshire. Then the Queen will ask Ms Truss to be Prime Minister, to form a government. In fact, Liz Truss is the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. And it is then expected that the appointment of a new cabinet will begin. And the new Prime Minister will appear in the Commons on Wednesday for her first PMQs. It'll be the first Prime Minister's questions between Liz Truss and Keir Starmer. And what about any policy announcements? As I say, she has promised immediate action on energy bills. She says that will come in the first week of taking office. As we've been saying to many of our guests, there's a suggestion there might be something as early as Thursday. And then we know that in early October, there will be the annual Conservative Party conference. That's being held this year in Birmingham. Liz Truss also promised a fiscal event very soon. That was the phrase she used. We do know there has to be a budget by November. In terms of any general election, She doesn't have to call a general election until the end of 2024. But of course, Parliament could be dissolved sooner than that. Well, let's discuss with Mark Littlewood, I think, is ready to join us. He is Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs. Mark Littlewood, what do you expect, hope to hear in the next few days and weeks?
Well, I certainly don't envy the new Prime Minister's inbox. A large number of urgent issues and a vast number of important issues too. It's the most difficult time you could imagine to take over being Prime Minister. But what I'm expecting and indeed hoping for is that Liz Truss is going to be as bold as she has said she will be in her campaign and actually in her acceptance speech today. I think steady as she goes and sort of more managerial politics won't cut it. So we're probably going to hear about the energy package in just a few days' time. I guess if you were to roll forward a little beyond that, what are her and her new Chancellor, who's very likely to be Kwasi Kwarteng, what are their plans for the emergency budget? And I would be surprised if that wasn't perhaps the most radical budget that we would have seen in about 40 years. I'm hoping that that will really get tax down. I'm hoping for a lot of supply side and deregulatory reform. In short, I'm hoping and anticipating that Liz Truss will be a very, very radical Prime Minister. That does mean that she's likely to make a few missteps if you're moving at that sort of speed. But I'm expecting a whirlwind of activity and announcements and some pretty radical plans and thinking. We'll see the start of that, I think, as early as tomorrow.
I mean, I think I'm right in saying you know her pretty well. So is that the personality that you know? Is that what you would expect?
Yes, I've known her for a little over 25 years, and I think she's a personality type who will always be inclined to twist rather than stick on most decisions. I wouldn't go so far as say she's reckless. I don't think she is reckless. But given two options, one of which might be high rate of return with a bigger risk, one might be a lower rate of return, much more cautious, I'm expecting her to go for the slightly more risky options. I think that she's likely, she said this to me not too long ago, she's likely to be a bit cautious on her comms and press strategy, I think, but not very cautious on her policy strategy. So I really do think we're going to have quite a shift in emphasis. We've had a Conservative government or a Conservative-led government since 2010, but I think actually this is going to be markedly different to the three Conservative Prime Ministers that have immediately preceded her. I don't think she's likely to take lots of soundings, weigh them all up and then take the kind of middle position. I think in many areas she'll have a clear direction of travel. I expect that to be towards deregulation, lower taxes and a plan to actually get economic growth up. And she'll then lay out that plan and hope that the Conservative Party follows her. Of course, uniting the Conservative Party is one challenge. Uniting the country will be an even bigger challenge. But she has no time to lose. There's probably about 700 days until the next election. I know it's common for commentators to sort of judge Prime Ministers after their first 100 days in office. That's normally the historical way it's done, to see how they're getting on early doors. I don't think she's got 100 days to make a mark. I think she's got something more like 20.
Mark Littlewood from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Really interesting to hear your perspectives there, and Mark Littlewood really encapsulating in just a few minutes a very, very large range of issues that are confronting Liz Truss, and really striking, isn't it, to hear his take on the tone that we might see in the coming weeks and months, given that he has known her for 25 years. That's really very interesting indeed. Radical on policy, perhaps less radical on comms. Some very interesting insights there. Well, we all keep talking, don't we? Every analyst, every Conservative, every member of every party we've spoken to, I think, in the last few days has used that word daunting, the daunting set of challenges that she really is facing. Whoever would have won at lunchtime is going to face that when they enter number 10 here tomorrow. Let's again just remind ourselves, inflation. Double-digit inflation is where the country is right now. It's currently above 10%, and you will know there have been forecasts it could go considerably higher. Certainly suggestions it could hit 13% this winter. Rising inflation is usually tackled by increasing interest rates, which the Bank of England has done now on 6 consecutive occasions. To remind you, they now stand at 1.75%. The bank hoping that will encourage people to save. But of course, it does have a knock-on for a lot of people with mortgages. Some people with mortgages see their monthly payments go up. And the biggest factor affecting households around the country at the moment is, as we've been saying all afternoon, rising energy bills. And let's remind ourselves of the figure again. From October, the typical household bill will hit £3,549 a year. That is when the new price cap comes in. Let's discuss what lies ahead with Tony Danker, who is head of the CBI, who I'm pleased to say joins me now, Director General of the CBI. Tony Danker, we have talked so much today, as you would expect and appreciate, about the family domestic energy bill, people's, individuals' household energy bills. But businesses are caught up in this too. They pay gas bills, they pay electricity bills. What are you hearing about what businesses might want specifically on that issue, first of all?
Well, that's right. Look, everybody cares about households, and heating versus eating, that can't be the story of this winter for the UK. But you're right to point out the business situation, because people may not realise, but businesses have no energy cap. They haven't had energy cap for over a year. And some of the annual price rises in energy bills have been up to something like 300%. And some of the ones we're hearing about in the last week or two as bills get renewed are 1,000% and above. Now, what that does for some businesses, if you're running a small business and all of a sudden your bill's gone from £2,000 a year to £25,000 a year, you can't continue, right? You're going to close your doors. So we've got a set of very small firms, and we've got very energy intensive industries who simply can't afford these escalating energy costs. And we've got a whole set of other firms, probably a lot of small businesses, for whom the cliff edge that's coming on new energy contracts, new energy bills, are astronomical and need smoothing. So I'm pretty hopeful that this week not only will the new Prime Minister tackle energy bills for households, she'll also look at businesses too.
OK, that's interesting. So you're hopeful. I mean, have you had any soundings? I'm sure you've tried to have a few conversations over the course of the summer. Do you have any optimism that she does get it, that her team gets it, that businesses will be remembered as well as families?
No, I think they do get it. The conversations are encouraging. But the truth is, if we're being honest, we've had a 3-month political vacuum at the heart of government. So it's been almost impossible to talk to a would-be Prime Minister or a Prime Minister or a Chancellor about these matters. So I think really in the last week or so, Liz Truss and her team, as well as Rishi Sunak and his team, we're starting to dig into the details, and we're having very accelerated conversations now about the need to tackle energy for firms as well, of course, for households.
And more broadly, I appreciate these are broad terms, but what is it that you hear business really wants from a Liz Truss government, away from the cost of living crisis? Because we know there's been, she talks a lot about tax cuts, doesn't she? This is clearly something that came through time and again over the course of the summer. Now, is that something that businesses small and large want, or actually do they want to see spending on skills? Because I feel as if every time I talk to a business leader, they talk about investment in skills.
Yeah, look, you're right. What they really want is a plan for growth. And we have in Liz Truss a new Prime Minister who is very motivated and informed on the economy and very supportive of business, who is now betting the shop on growth. And she's right, and that will be very good news to businesses up and down the country who want a growth plan. Now, tax is the bit they've been talking about over the summer. It was been the internal Tory election issue, but a plan for growth is broader. As you say, it involves things like skills and investment and infrastructure and clean energy and life science success, as well as the tax environment. And so what I hope we'll see is a rounded package, a rounded agenda that's not just about 1 or 2 totemic tax cuts. That was for the campaign. What we now need is, yes, action on tax, because you can't put tax up by 6 points in the middle of a recession, as was intended to be so for firms, but also a broader plan for growth rooted in where we think the UK economy can flourish post-Brexit. We've got lots of ideas. Look forward to talking to the new Prime Minister about them.
Tony Danker, really glad you could talk to us. Thanks very much for your time this afternoon. Thank you, the Director General of the business organisation, the CBI. Well, before he goes, Boris Johnson is using his last day as Prime Minister to push to grant a medal for Britain's nuclear test veterans. Associations, victims and relatives have been campaigning to bring justice for those who took part in the UK's nuclear testing programmes for nearly 4 decades during the Cold War. Let's hear more, I think, on that from Ben Wright.
There is unlikely to be another Prime Minister quite like Boris Johnson.
I want you to know how sad I am to be giving up the best job in the world. But them's the breaks. Thank you all very much.
A premiership that was brief and chaotic, but reshaped the country. An election-winning leader who was slung out of office by his party. He took over in 2019 after Theresa May was toppled. With many MPs trying to block a no-deal Brexit, Boris Johnson soon proved his readiness to rip up conventions by suspending Parliament, a move criticised by the Supreme Court.
The decision to advise Her Majesty to prorogue Parliament was unlawful.
Weeks later, he gambled on a general election, winning the Tories their biggest majority for 30 years.
We did it! We did it! We pulled it off, didn't we?
The man who had led the Brexit campaign now had the votes in Parliament to leave the EU. Brexit deeply split the country. Its legacy will be felt and disputed for years. For this reason alone, Boris Johnson will go down in history as a Prime Minister of consequence. And then came this, the first pandemic for a century.
I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
COVID dominated his premiership. Lockdowns. A vaccine, but many lives lost. An inquiry will now examine what the government got right and wrong.
Have you lied to the public, Prime Minister?
Clearly wrong was the lockdown-breaking culture in Downing Street during COVID. The Partygate scandal engulfed Boris Johnson. There were allegations, denials, a police investigation and fines, including one for the Prime Minister himself.
I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch.
His integrity was under question, his authority damaged.
I can announce that the Parliamentary Party does have confidence.
Boris Johnson survived a confidence vote in June, but Number 10's handling of a sexual harassment allegation involving a Tory MP a month later was the final straw.
How are you? Nice to see you.
Boris Johnson's muscular support for Ukraine following Russia's invasion is an important part of his legacy too. His successor will now have to deal with the conflict that is fueling an energy and inflation crisis here. So a Prime Minister during a tumultuous time, a gifted campaigner brought down by his own conduct in office. Ben Wright, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, we talked so much about the cost of living and energy bills. Let's take a few minutes, if we can, to just reflect on another key issue which faces the country, the NHS and social care. We wait to see what Liz Truss may promise on that. We know we may be heading into another difficult winter. We know about the issues around bed blocking, lack of capacity in social care. So let's discuss all of that with Saffron Cordery, who is Interim Chief Executive of NHS Providers. Saffron Cordery, thanks for being with us. What would you like to hear from the new Prime Minister in the first few days and weeks of her premiership?
We've got to be absolutely clear that Liz Truss is going to tackle those issues facing the NHS head on, that she's not going to duck them. So we need to make sure that she's got a plan to tackle workforce. We've got a staggering 130,000 vacancies across the NHS, so that's got to be top of her list. We also know that social care desperately needs reform and additional funding. Without that, as you said, we aren't going to get through the really challenging winter ahead, but also thinking about things like urgent care and thinking about the flow of patients through hospital. We can't manage that without really effective social care. And finally, I think it's absolutely critical that we remember we need to see an investment of capital in the NHS. So we've got to continue with that 40 new hospitals programme, but we've got to make sure that we also see reform of some of those really complicated rules affecting how organisations can actually use their money for buildings is actually reformed, so that we get to a place where trusts can really have fit-for-purpose buildings.
Are you worried about strikes in your sector? We've seen so many. Is there anything that could be said or done in that regard?
I think what we've got to make sure that we do is ensure that the staff on the front line that work so hard, that's 1.1 million staff who've brought us through the pandemic and have worked their socks off, frankly, in order to get us to where we are now, which is doing their very best despite some significant challenges, have a pay award and a system of reward that really recognises what they do. And linked to that, we've got to make sure that the government fully funds that pay award so that the NHS itself isn't paying in order to pay its own staff extra, because that will just undermine services that will affect patients. So there's a whole bundle of measures there and steps that Liz Truss really needs to take to make sure that the NHS is on a firm footing. And the one thing I would say is that she needs to go with what's already in place for the NHS. We don't need to see top-down reorganisation. What we need to see is her working with the front line in order to come to the decisions about the solutions that they need to see to put us on the right footing.
Saffron Caudry from NHS Providers, thanks so much for joining us. Just as the rain comes again in Downing Street, let's get the weather. Here's Darren.
Hello there. For many parts of the UK today, it's going to be dry and there'll be some warm sunshine as well. Over the weekend, it was a weekend of contrast. Much wetter in western areas close to low pressure. 4 inches of rain falling on Dartmoor. For many eastern parts of England, it was completely dry and temperatures reached 26 degrees. We did get some rain, though, overnight, even across some eastern parts of the UK, and over 36,000 lightning strikes as well. And we're seeing some more heavy showers developing at the moment, and this is where we've got the greatest risk of some more thunderstorms from now until the early hours of Tuesday morning, although there could be 1 or 2 storms elsewhere. This was the rain, though, that cleared away from overnight, moving away from Scotland, but it's here in the south that we've seen those showers developing. Those will turn heavy, potentially thundery, and drift their way northwards across southern England into parts of Wales and into the Midlands as well. But to the north of that, particularly across Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and East Anglia, temperatures are going to be very warm, 26, 27 degrees here. But through this evening then, we're looking at these showers breaking out here in the south. The risk of some thunderstorms once again and lightning, and they drift their way northwards all the way up towards Scotland. Somewhat clearer skies following on behind as it dries off across England and Wales. Maybe 1 or 2 mist and fog patches as well, and warm temperatures 14 or 15 degrees. Now we're seeing the northern lights over the past couple of nights in northern Scotland. This was the view last night. The aurora activity is lesser tonight and there may well be more cloud around as well. And still some showery bursts of rain to start the day in Scotland and also the north of England. Then we're going to find this slice of drier weather and some sunshine before more rain sweeps up from the southwest into parts of Wales, the Midlands and across the southeast of England. Those downpours could be heavy and thundery once again. So probably not quite as warm tomorrow, still making 23 or 24 degrees at very best. Now, the main driver of the weather over the weekend and through the rest of this week is this area of low pressure, and it's going to move from the west towards the east right over the UK. It will cut off that supply of warmer air, and also the winds may not be quite so strong. But we're left with some sunshine, but we're also going to find some showers or some longer spells of rain developing, and that rain could turn heavy and thundery once again. So typical temperatures on Wednesday are going to be around 20 or 21 Celsius.
Hello, I'm Ross Atkins here in Downing Street. Welcome to BBC News. Liz Truss has been chosen as the new Conservative Party leader and will now succeed Boris Johnson as Prime Minister tomorrow. She's won the backing of the Conservative Party's members. She beat Rishi Sunak. She took 57% of the vote and says she will govern as a Conservative and deliver what was promised to voters.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
The cost of living crisis is going to dominate a full in-tray when Liz Truss officially becomes Prime Minister tomorrow. We'll hear from voters about their concerns.
Well, I really think that she needs to sort out this energy crisis. I mean, us low-paid workers, we're having real problems.
I think she'll do as good a job as she can. I'm sure she will, but there's a terrible mess, isn't there, everywhere.
And I'm Shaun with the other headlines this hour. Police in Canada hunt 2 men suspected of a mass killing in which 10 people were stabbed to death and 15 others injured. The High Court begins 5 days of hearings over British government plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. And from today, millions of people in England and Scotland join those in Wales who are invited for their autumn COVID booster vaccine.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Downing Street, which will be home from tomorrow to Liz Truss, who's going to become Britain's next Prime Minister. She's been declared the winner of the Conservative Party's leadership contest. She beat her rival Rishi Sunak by more than 20,000 votes. She took 57% of the votes that were cast. And she says she campaigned as a Conservative and that she will govern as a Conservative. She's also promising to deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow the economy, and she's promising to deliver with help on energy bills and on the National Health Service. Well, tomorrow, Tuesday, she will travel to meet the Queen at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire to complete the transfer of power, bringing to an end Boris Johnson's 3-year premiership. And the Prime Minister congratulated his successor on what he called her decisive win, saying she has the right plan to tackle the cost of living crisis, unite our party and continue the great work of uniting and levelling up our country. Now is the time for all Conservatives to get behind her 100%, says Boris Johnson. Well, our political correspondent Helen Catt has been following the day's developments.
Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak together as candidates for the last time. The votes of Conservative members already counted, the winner already decided. To a packed hall in Westminster, the man overseeing the contest announced the final result.
Rishi Sunak, 60,399. Liz Truss, 81,326. Therefore, I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. We'll come up on stage.
For Liz Truss, a victory speech.
During this leadership campaign, I campaigned as a Conservative and I will govern as a Conservative. And my friends, we need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
And she paid tribute to the man she's about to replace.
Boris, you got Brexit done. You crushed Jeremy Corbyn. You rolled out the vaccine and you stood up to Vladimir Putin. You were admired from Kiev to Carlisle.
The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak had led the initial ballot of Conservative MPs. His defeat when voting was widened out to the members had been predicted, but the result was closer than some had expected. Liz Truss now has the top job in her party, which she will need to reunite after a bruising contest.
We all need to turn our attention very swiftly to supporting the new Prime Minister and her new team in delivering for the British people, and particularly now with everything we've got going on, particularly with inflation and cost of living, the challenges that they present. I think that's what the public will expect, and I think that's what everyone, myself included, will do.
And tomorrow she moves in here, taking the top job in the country, with a to-do list arguably more challenging than any recent Prime Minister, as the Labour leader on a visit to a school in North London was quick to point out.
She needs to deal with the cost of living crisis, she needs to deal with the fact the NHS is on its knees, and she needs to deal with the collapse of law and order. And there can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
There's been criticism of how long this contest has taken to appoint a new leader. Nominations among MPs opened 8 weeks ago, and critics say that's left a vacuum at a crucial time when people are facing soaring costs. Liz Truss has promised she will move quickly and will set out her plans for help within days of taking office. She may be enjoying this moment, but the hard work starts now. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, next on BBC News, let's speak to Natalie Bennett, former leader of the Green Party, who's now in the House of Lords. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. How do you assess Liz Truss's credentials when it comes to the environment? She was an Environment Secretary, of course.
Well, her history as Environment Secretary is not encouraging, but as everyone's saying from all sides of politics, this is a fresh start. And what happened during the leadership campaign, what Liz Truss was saying about fracking, about pursuing new oil and gas in the North Sea, that was what happened in the campaign. Now's the time for a fresh start. And it's very clear that the real problem with our soaring energy bills that's causing so much stress and worry and concern and poverty already, with more to come, is our reliance on fossil fuels. So this is a chance for Liz Truss to make a new start, to focus on renewables and particularly energy conservation. We really need to hear the words insulation all of the time from the government, and delivery on warm, comfortable homes for everybody.
Well, you say that the UK needs to come behind renewables. The Conservative Party would point to the fact that it's rapidly increased its support of renewables in recent years, and the percentage of our energy mix which come from renewable has risen, as you would know. So what more do you want from this next Conservative Prime Minister?
Yes, we have seen some progress, and we've just had a report out this week focusing on how, if the government's going to meet its targets, particularly for offshore wind, which has been the real focus, it's going to have to move much faster. Of course, we've seen no progress at all on onshore wind, which is one of the cheapest two forms, and we've also seen no progress in terms of solar energy panels on particularly new houses and installed in existing homes. Those two things have stalled over the past 10 years of various forms of Conservative government. Those are the cheapest forms. We need to see those going forward, and on offshore wind we also need to see progress, as that report highlighted.
But you would presumably accept that even if all of those things were done by Liz Truss and her government, they would bring benefits and further renewable energy in the medium and long term. They wouldn't necessarily have an impact on the crisis facing many families now. Do you accept that in the short term it may be justifiable to seek other fossil fuel sources beyond the ones that are under pressure?
Well, short term, the practical reality is neither fracking nor new oil and gas fields are going to deliver any significant forms of energy in anything less than the best part of a decade, and the costs will be the global price. What we need to do is fix the prices and nationalise the big five energy retailers. That's what the Green Party is calling for. We're calling for the bills to go back to the levels of October 2021. That's about, for the average house, £1,277 a year, and to pay for that through a proper windfall tax, not the very attenuated one we saw from the last government, and acknowledging also that we're going to see inflation and VAT revenue will increase as a result of that.
But you and I both know that a windfall tax would only go a little way towards the cost of what you're describing. If you fully nationalise the energy sector and cap prices at 2021 levels, you'll need more than a windfall tax. You'll need a significant amount of government borrowing. Is that the Green Party policy?
Well, the cost, we can put a figure on this. I mean, obviously it depends on where global prices go, and that's something that's shifting as we talk. But the figure a week or so back was £37 billion. And what we can do is take out the real huge concession made in the windfall tax levied by the government, which would see that if the oil and gas industry invests in new, 94p in the pound would be actually being paid for from the public purse. So take away that concession, that gives you a chunk of the money. But at the end of the day, we have households that have to be able to put food on the table, keep a roof over their head, and energy bills are essentially going to swallow all of the money that is required to do that. I mean, we're already seeing figures out from YouGov this morning saying 16% of people are skipping meals already because of their energy bills.
Natalie Bennett, thank you very much indeed. And as she was accepting the leadership of the Conservative Party earlier, Liz Truss indicated that she will announce within days a response to the energy crisis that Natalie Bennett describes there. Now, as we've been reflecting, the Prime Minister-to-be faces a daunting set of challenges. First and foremost, the one we're talking about, the cost of living crisis, which connects to soaring energy bills. At the moment, inflation in the UK stands above 10%, but there have been forecasts it could hit 13% this winter. Rising inflation is usually tackled by increasing interest rates, which the Bank of England has done on 6 consecutive occasions. So at the moment they stand at 1.75%. The bank hopes it will encourage people to save, but it means some people with mortgages see their monthly payments go up. And of course the biggest factor affecting households around the country at the moment is those rising energy bills. From October, the typical household bill will hit £3,549 when the new price cap comes in. Well, the BBC's been speaking to people in Birmingham about their main concerns.
Everything's to do with the cost of living, isn't it? Everything's gone up, nothing's coming down.
Us pensioners, we're struggling. My bills have gone double now. My electric and gas from £90, £230 to £250.
We keep talking, do we choose to eat or heat? That is the reality. We are going to struggle. And prices are ridiculous. My bills have gone up threefold.
Everything is skyrocketing and people need to live lives and people have to cut down on essentials.
The economy and the prices of gas and electric and getting people out of poverty. I think that's the main thing to focus on right now.
Well, here at Downing Street with me is the BBC News business editor Simon Jack. Hi, Simon. Hi, so Monday, Liz Truss wins the Conservative Party leadership. Tuesday, she becomes Prime Minister. Sounds like by the end of the week, she's going to have to announce one of the most sizable interventions in the energy market for years.
This could be the shortest honeymoon period any Prime Minister has ever enjoyed. And we are expecting her to lay out details on Thursday about how she's going to tackle, without doubt, the most pressing issue in her inbox. Who's going to pay the energy bill this winter? Now, there is some support that's already been announced. That comes in October, £400 for all households, an extra £650 for qualifying households. But those were set when the energy price cap was expected to hit £2,800. It's going to hit £3,500 plus and could hit £5,000 or even £6,000 next year. So how do you get a grip on that? Now, there is a plan of sorts which the energy industry itself has come up with, and that involves getting the government to guarantee a super fund of loans which the energy companies themselves can draw down on and use that to freeze or lower or subsidise bills, with that money being paid off over 5, 10, 15, even 20 years, building a bridge to the future past this current crisis where we'll have more renewables, more domestic oil and gas resources available. But the question is, can they do that? And we're talking about 100 billion, maybe 100 billion plus, if you include businesses who, by the way, have not been the focus of this so far. It's all been households, but they usually renew their energy bills in October. They haven't got a price cap. They're about to be hit by the full horror of bills going up by fourfold, fivefold, even tenfold in some cases.
But hold on, even if that happens and all of these billions of loans are offered, in the short term that eases the pressure on businesses and individuals, who's paying them back in 20 years?
Well, what you would do, the idea is that you would basically borrow that money now and you would add a little bit of money to bills over, perhaps up to 20 years, but that would bake in higher bills for longer. And if the government is lending money to energy companies and the energy companies in turn are lending it to businesses who might be on the cusp, some people say we are already in a recession, there's got to be some risk that money won't get paid back, and therefore the government will be on the hook for some, if not all, of that money. However, the government hopes that by putting in a separate vehicle, that means they can press ahead with their tax cuts and then their big spending pledges on things like defence. There's no doubt that the soon-to-be Chancellor, we think, Kwasi Kwarteng, has already admitted that what they'll need is fiscal loosening, which is code for a lot more borrowing.
And just put this in context for us, because it doesn't seem so long ago that you and I were talking about Rishi Sunak's plan for furlough during the pandemic. How does what he did as Chancellor compare with what Liz Truss and her new Chancellor, whoever she chooses, will do when they are in charge?
OK, so the cost of the furlough, which paid 11 million people's wages, or 80% of them, for a year and a half at any given point, cost about 70 billion. This plan, we're talking about 100 billion. If you don't include businesses, you include business, you'll double that. Compared to the entire pandemic support package, which was around 400 billion, it's less than that. But for some businesses that I talk to, they say, this is worse. I've got my costs going up, my customers' pockets being emptied. And at least during the pandemic, we felt that we had some support. At the moment, it's not clear what support they have. That bit about business support is most unclear, but it couldn't be more urgent given the knock-on effects on the economy.
All right, Simon, thank you very much indeed. And there's analysis from Simon and all of our BBC News colleagues on the live page that you can find right now at bbc.com/news. Now, let's speak to another colleague, Ione Wells, our political correspondent, live with us from Westminster. Ione, great to have you with us. Now, help me understand this result. 57% of the votes went to Liz Truss, but actually, if you see that as a total of all Conservative Party members, because they didn't all vote, I think it's around 47% of the voters with this particular constituency went for her. Is that a problem for her, or just simply the way the system works?
Well, Boris, these figures that you mentioned are really interesting. As you say, 57% of the valid votes cast went to Liz Truss. Now, that is lower than the equivalent percentage for her predecessors, for Boris Johnson, for David Cameron, and for Ian Duncan Smith as well. So clearly, she didn't necessarily win the support of kind of all of those kind of Conservative Party members that they might have been hoping for. It was probably closer than I think a lot of her camp were potentially expecting. And as you say, 47% of members overall decided to vote for Liz Truss. Now, in terms of why this matters, one key theme that we heard so much of when we were hearing that result was uniting the party, the need for unity. This was something that MPs across the Tory party were saying at that event. And I think there's sort of two reasons for this. One is the reason we've just discussed, the fact that clearly the result was a bit closer than expected. Some members were backing Rishi Sunak and his very different economic plan. And secondly, important to remember as well, that until right up to the end of this contest that's gone on all summer now, only 11 more Conservative MPs were publicly backing Liz Truss compared to Rishi Sunak, with dozens still undeclared. So clearly there was this still quite a big division within the parliamentary party as well, again backing two very different visions for the economy going forward. Now, we have had Rishi Sunak and his supporters today come out and say that there is now this need to unite the party. And I think some might be asking, well, why is this important? Why is party unity important at a time when there are bigger issues around things like the cost of living? But the reason it is so important politically is because, as Boris Johnson learnt, it is very hard to govern, it is very hard to pass policies that matter to people's lives if the party is occupied with things like internal infighting, as we saw over the last couple of months in Boris Johnson's government.
Thank you on that, Ione. Help me out a little bit with the chronology that's coming our way. I know that Boris Johnson will head to see the Queen first tomorrow, then Liz Truss not long afterwards. Once that's happened and Liz Truss has become Prime Minister, she has to go to Scotland to see the Queen, of course. What happens then? What happens on Tuesday afternoon and then into Wednesday and beyond?
Well, I think things are going to start moving really quickly, Ros. As you say, she will have to go and see the Queen as well. Well, she will officially become the new Prime Minister. We're then expecting the first speech from Liz Truss as Prime Minister in Downing Street, where she will set out her vision for her premiership. Then it's expected that she will start quickly appointing her new cabinet of government ministers. Now, this is going to be really interesting to watch. We already have a pretty good sense of who is in the running for those top positions with Kwasi Kwarteng, much expected to be the new Chancellor, for example. James Cleverly, much expected to be the new Foreign Secretary, and Suella Braverman also much expected to be the new Home Secretary. So some of those top jobs certainly already had significant discussions around them. Some of those other positions will be key to watch. Again, going back to our discussion about party unity, one of the questions is how many, if any, supporters of Rishi Sunak will she try and bring into the fold? I spoke to one supporter of his earlier today, one of the more kind of centrist Conservative MPs, who said that if she really wants to see party unity, then she can't give all the sweeties to the right-wingers. I think meaning there that she may need to offer a kind of olive branch to some of those who didn't agree with her policies during this campaign if she wants to seek to sort of unite both sides again. But certainly that will be the kind of priority Tuesday afternoon. And then Wednesday morning, she faces her first Prime Minister's questions, with questions from the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer as well. And then we are expecting that in the coming week there will be an announcement on energy, what support she's going to do to help households with their bills, but also try and secure our energy supply longer term as well. So that is the number one priority in her in-tray, and we have been told that there is potentially some update on that penciled in for Thursday.
It's going to come thick and fast for Liz Truss. Thank you very much indeed, Ione Wells. So we think around this time tomorrow we may get a statement, a speech from Liz Truss here in Downing Street, and then after that, late afternoon, early evening, into the evening, as Ione was explaining, that's when we start getting details of who will be in her cabinet. Now, of course, we're all getting to know Liz Truss and have been getting to know her over the last few weeks during the campaign, and the country's going to get to know her much better in the coming weeks and months. But let's look at what we already know about a politician who's about to become Britain's third female Prime Minister. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, has this report.
She's a grafter. She means what she says, she knows what she wants, and she gets it.
These are some of Liz Truss's most supportive friends. Activists in her Norfolk constituency have nothing but praise for their MP, the next Prime Minister.
The job is so important to her, getting done what she wants to get done.
There's no airs and graces about Liz. She's just, as you see, she's got the skin of a rhinoceros when it comes to putting up with people having a go at her, I can assure you.
Several times over the years, colleagues have predicted that Liz Truss's career was on a downward path, that she'd soon be spending more time here in Norfolk than in Westminster. But friends say she's always been underestimated, and her survival is evidence of a clever politician with a steely determination.
Her political journey has taken her from a family she describes as left-wing, where she joined her parents in the campaign for unilateral nuclear disarmament, to Oxford University, where she was a Liberal Democrat and took to the conference stage to argue in favour of abolishing the monarchy.
We Liberal Democrats believe in opportunity for all. We believe in fairness and common sense.
After graduating, she joined the Conservatives, worked as an accountant and was selected to fight the safe Tory seat of South West Norfolk. But her political career was almost derailed when news emerged of an affair with an MP. She fought off attempts to oust her and was elected to Parliament in 2010. She was quickly promoted first to Education Minister. Those who worked with her back then say she was always across the detail.
One of the things that successful teams need is someone who really believes in an idea, and Liz really believes in a lot of very big ideas. When I worked for her, we called her the Minister for Maths, and this was a real focal point. She can create a team through her beliefs, through her passion, through her evangelism for important ideas.
Her first cabinet job was Environment Secretary. It was obvious, though, that some work would be needed on her presentational skills.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Liz.
When the Brexit referendum was called, she campaigned to stay in the EU, something she later said was wrong. Nicola Horlick, a Liberal Democrat, was part of that Remain team.
For somebody to say, you know, I had this conviction about one thing and the next day, actually, I was wrong about that and I've now got a different conviction. When it seems that that's just about getting power, that really concerns me.
You don't agree with Liz Truss on lots of things. Do you think she's got any qualities that would make her a decent Prime Minister?
You've got this person who's very disciplined, very well organised, but is lacking on the communication and charisma side.
But friends say she does know how to get her message across, and her Instagram posts show her playful side. Ruder colleagues think her love of a photo opportunity betrays a superficiality. She was certainly mocked for this regal pose last Christmas. Her promotion to Foreign Secretary has given her a global platform. Some think there are less than subtle echoes of Margaret Thatcher, a comparison she loves. Liz Truss will be Britain's third female Prime Minister. Life for her, her husband and 2 daughters is about to change, and no one's underestimating the challenges that lie ahead. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's bring in Tim Montgomery, who is co-founder of the website Conservative Home. He's a former supporter of Boris Johnson. In fact, he's a former advisor too. Tim, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on the BBC. I think it's fair to say Liz Truss wasn't your first choice, so what are your emotions today?
Yeah, I went through quite a few candidates, Ros, on the way to this result. I preferred Liz Truss in the final round over Rishi Sunak, but was slightly surprised at the narrowness of the result. I think both Liz Truss's team and the pollsters were pointing to a more emphatic win. And I think that sort of relative narrowness of the result will perhaps argue that she needs to be a little bit more conciliatory with the defeated candidate, perhaps bring on a few more of the Sunak supporters than she had intended, because certainly the weekend press speculation suggested a lot of the people that she looked like she was appointing were chums, people that had supported her. And I think she needs to reach out to form a broader tent than perhaps was plan A.
Now, you supported her over Rishi Sunak, but what about Rishi Sunak's supporters and their criticism of Liz Truss, where they say, look, a lot of this is ideological and her plans to respond to the cost of living crisis and other policies, well, they just don't really connect with reality, with how much money this government's got, with what is actually going to help the economy?
Well, look, I think within the next few days, perhaps as early as Thursday, the new Prime Minister, as we'll then be able to call her, will make a very substantial commitment to help people, not just on low incomes, but people up the income scale as well, to help them pay their energy bills. And if that first impression is as impactful as I hope it will be, that could sort of put the government, at least in its early honeymoon stage, on a good footing. I actually thought the most important thing she said yesterday, Liz Truss said in her interview with Laura Kunzberg on the new Sunday political programme, that she wasn't going to tamper with the Bank of England mandate. Obviously, the number one fight that we have as a country is against inflation. She had, during the leadership election, suggested she might revisit the Bank of England mandate. Saying that she will no longer do that suggests that she gets that importance of fighting inflation, and the recent weakness of sterling on international markets, which you've been highlighting in some of your reporting, Ross, they understand that and they're worried about it.
Now, Tim, you're, of course, not just a supporter of the Conservative Party, you're a keen student of it, and you'll know that back in 2019, ahead of the election, Boris Johnson very much said to everyone within the party, either you get with my programme or you're going to have to leave, and quite a few people did leave. Do you think Liz Truss's victory today has really cemented Boris Johnson's resetting of where the Conservative Party sits?
Well, I think it was interesting. I don't think there were many top lines from her acceptance speech today at the QE2 Centre when the result was announced, but she really did praise Boris Johnson very fulsomely. And I think there is both hope that Boris Johnson will be there to support Liz Truss in her premiership, but there's also a lot of concern that, you know, he's a big beast, almost like an elephant, and even if he doesn't intend to cause trouble, he's just such a big presence that he will attract a lot of attention. He may restart his weekly newspaper column very soon, and however much some Tories would wish Boris Johnson to go away, he isn't going to go away. He's going to continue to be a presence in British politics, and he's going to take a lot of managing by Liz Truss.
Tim, always good to have you on the programme on BBC News. Thank you very much indeed. Yes, we'll see how Boris Johnson adjusts to life outside of number 10. We do know that tomorrow, though, he is going to be leaving. He'll step out of this door. He's going to make a statement, we think, at some point in the morning. He will then travel to Balmoral in Scotland to see the Queen and formally offer his resignation. Not too long afterwards, Liz Truss will arrive and she will propose to the Queen that she is going to form the next government, and then she'll come back to London, and we're expecting a speech from her. Also here in Downing Street, we're not quite sure of the exact timings, but mid-afternoon. And from then, the work really begins. We'll get the cabinet, we'll get policy announcements, it will all start happening. Now, we've had some reaction to Liz Truss's win from leaders around the world. Let me show you some of them. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has congratulated her, saying the EU and the UK are partners. We face many challenges together, from climate change to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I look forward to a constructive relationship in full respect of our agreements. You wonder if that is a nod to the fact that there's been tensions over the implementation of some aspects of the Brexit agreement. And the Indian Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, says he's confident that under Liz Truss's leadership, the partnership between India and the UK will be further strengthened. Well, let's bring in our correspondent, Jessica Parker, in Brussels. Jessica, I wonder what you made of that statement from Ursula von der Leyen. All very congratulatory, but that seemed a little pointed at the end.
I think it's very pointed. I think you're exactly right. And having listened to a few comments from people from the European Commission today, I'd say that the congratulations that are being offered to Liz Truss are very much caveated, because the European Commission is deeply unhappy with the UK's plans to potentially override part of the post-Brexit treaty that governs trading arrangements for Northern Ireland. If they were hoping for a change in tack in terms of the policy now that Liz Truss is set to be the new UK Prime Minister, well, they would be disappointed. They know they'll be disappointed because she is actually the political architect of the legislation to do just that, that is going to be going through Parliament or continue its journey through Parliament. I think the question is whether there might be some effort to restart talks on how to fix problems with the Northern Ireland protocol that's caused particular concerns amongst the unionist community in Northern Ireland, and that will be up to Liz Truss as well as the EU. The EU's been signalling its door is open, but I think the wider context here is that the relationship after Brexit between Brussels and London has been strained. I don't think Liz Truss was exactly who the Commission and the EU here in Brussels would have had as their top pick for the next Prime Minister, given she is a Boris Johnson loyalist, given her stance on issues like the Northern Ireland Protocol. But the point they keep trying to make is that there are there are other issues at stake at the moment, such as Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and they want to work with the United Kingdom, but they also want to send a message that they think the UK needs to respect, as they would see it, those international agreements. The UK has consistently blamed EU intransigence for some of these issues around the post-Brexit arrangements for Northern Ireland, and it just looks like these arguments may rumble on, but we'll have to wait and see what Team Truss does in the next few days and weeks.
So they may rumble on. Just help us remember exactly where we'd got to with the Northern Ireland Protocol, because the UK government and the EU have been exchanging criticisms for months over this. This is, as you were saying, the part of the Brexit deal which looks after Northern Ireland status, particularly with reference to trade. Is there even an ongoing process at the moment for Liz Truss to pick up on?
Not really. So there were talks for many months, and you had David Frost, Lord Frost, who was in charge of those negotiations. Then he resigned. Then Liz Truss, as Foreign Secretary, picked up the brief. And initially, she had sort of some fairly cordial relations with the European Commissioner in charge of things here. But the situation deteriorated. They didn't seem to make enough progress, and talks have basically stalled for quite a long time now, although there's always some level of contact between the two sides, but there aren't official negotiations going on. Meanwhile, Liz Truss announced that she was going to launch this Northern Ireland Protocol bill, which could potentially override parts of the treaty. And at that point, the European Commission announced it would be launching fresh legal action. And there have been strong hints as well that were the UK actually to pursue this bill and start using it to get rid of parts of the treaty that they don't think are working, well, at that point, you could be getting into territory where you could see what's often referred to as a trade war between the EU and the UK. We're quite some way away from that still at the moment, I think. And something they're looking out for here is to whether Liz Truss really has the appetite to escalate that dispute, given the cost of living crisis in the UK, although, of course, there is also a cost of living crisis and an energy crisis, which is really the talk of the town here in Brussels.
OK, Jess, thank you very much indeed. There's Jess live with us from Brussels, and one of the big characters within the European Union is President Macron of France. You may remember there was a little bit of diplomatic activity after a couple of weeks ago. Liz Truss was asked in an interview with Julia Hartley-Brewer whether France was friend or foe, and her answer was not categorical. Well, President Macron has offered his congratulations to Liz Truss, who will become Prime Minister tomorrow. OK, let's take a break from the politics for a moment and have a look at the weather. Here's Darren Baird.
Hello there. For many northern parts of the UK, it's going to be dry this afternoon with some warm sunshine. We are seeing some showers, though, developing here in southern parts of England. Those will drift their way into Wales, parts of the Midlands, could turn heavy and thundery later. But ahead of it, it's going to be particularly warm across a good part of northern England, temperatures reaching 26 or even 27 degrees here. But these heavier downpours developing in the south, and particularly in the southwest Wales and parts of the Midlands, could turn heavy and thundery. Everything is drifting its way northwards on that southerly breeze. Some clearer skies following to the south, and a warm night, temperatures perhaps no lower than 14 or 15 degrees. Tomorrow we're going to keep some rain on and off through much of the day in Scotland and for a while in the far north of England. Then we've got this slice of drier weather with some sunshine, but more rain is developing and pushing in from the southwest towards Wales, the Midlands, and eventually in the southeast of England. And again, the risk of some heavy rain and some thunderstorms continues. Not quite as warm tomorrow, top temperatures 23 or 24 Celsius.
Welcome back to Downing Street. As we've been discussing, Liz Truss has been chosen as the new leader of the Conservative Party, and tomorrow, Tuesday, she will succeed Boris Johnson as the UK's Prime Minister. Liz Truss has won the backing of Conservative Party members. It was a two-candidate race by the end. She beat Rishi Sunak by taking 57% of the vote. She says she will govern as a Conservative and deliver what's been promised to voters.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
Well, as we heard in that clip, the cost of living crisis is very likely to dominate a bulging in tray when Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. That will officially happen tomorrow. We'll hear from voters about their concerns and priorities.
Well, I really think that she needs to sort out this energy crisis. I mean, us low-paid workers, we're having real problems.
I think she'll do as good a job as she can. I'm sure she will, but there's a terrible mess, isn't there, everywhere.
I'm Shaun with today's other stories. Police in Canada hunt two men suspected of a mass killing in which 10 people were stabbed to death and 15 others injured. A new challenge to the plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda will be held at the High Court. A charity has warned the government that many of those selected for deportation may have been victims of torture. From today, millions of people in England and Wales will join those in England and Scotland will join those in Wales who've been invited for their autumn COVID booster vaccine. The news comes as the NHS predicts a resurgence of COVID and the return of flu this winter. Now, before we return to Ross Atkins in Downing Street, let's look at some of those other stories in detail. In Canada, police are hunting two men after 10 people were stabbed to death. 15 others were injured in the attacks on Sunday in the province of Saskatchewan. It's one of the worst mass killings in Canadian history. Some of the victims appear to have been targeted, others attacked randomly. Canadian police have put 3 provinces on alert as they search for the killers. Gareth Barlow reports.
The scale of the manhunt is almost unfathomable. After a mass stabbing spree in 13 locations, Canadian police have issued a dangerous persons alert across an area almost half the size of Europe. The warning comes after the attacks in the remote, sparsely populated Indigenous community, James Smith Cree Nation, and the nearby village of Weldon. A local state of emergency is in force. Residents have been told not to leave their homes, and roadblocks have been set up across the region, with the suspects considered armed and dangerous.
Let me be clear. We are still looking for the 2 suspects. We are asking residents across Saskatchewan and our neighboring provinces to be vigilant. At this stage in our investigation, we believe some of the victims have been targeted by the suspect and others have been attacked randomly.
Police have named Damien Sanderson and Miles Sanderson, whose relationship is unknown, as suspects behind the stabbings. A vehicle linked to them was last seen in the city of Regina, 200 miles south of where the attacks took place. But their current location, along with any possible motive, remains unclear. Gareth Barlow, BBC News.
Police are questioning a fourth man in connection with the killing of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell in Liverpool. The man, who's aged 34, was arrested yesterday evening after being stopped on the M42 motorway in Warwickshire. He's being held on suspicion of assisting an offender. Barristers in England and Wales have begun what they say is a continuous strike in their dispute over pay. The Criminal Bar Association is asking for a 25% rise in pay for legal aid work, representing defendants who could not otherwise afford lawyers. Members have rejected the government's pay offer of 15%, saying it would not kick in immediately or apply to existing cases. Here's our correspondent Sancha Berg.
It's becoming a familiar sight in this summer of strikes. Criminal barristers in front of the courts rather than arguing cases inside. Now they've stepped up their action to an indefinite strike from today. That will halt activity across England and Wales, adding to the backlog of almost 60,000 cases. The government has offered a 15% rise in legal aid fees for new cases, but the barristers say they need to rise by 25% as soon as possible. They say 300 young barristers left criminal practice last year because they couldn't afford to stay.
Criminal barristers do not want to take action. They want to be in court doing what they do and doing what they've done for decades without having had to take this action. However, it's hit crisis point, and only this action was considered by barristers to get government to take the crisis within the criminal justice system seriously.
Dominic Raab, on the left, as Justice Secretary, refused to talk to the barristers. They're hoping that a new Secretary of State will take a different approach. Sancha Berg, BBC News.
Those are some of the other stories this hour. Back now to Downing Street and Ros Atkins for the top story of the day and indeed the week, Ros.
Hi, Shaun. It certainly will be the top story of the week, and you would imagine that with Liz Truss taking over as Prime Minister tomorrow and this immediate pressure to respond to the cost of living crisis, the decisions that she takes, along with the new cabinet, which she'll appoint through tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening, will of course have huge repercussions for the UK economy and for many people who are right now facing rising bills that are starting to feel untenable. Well, that's how we think this will go through the week. Liz Truss will formally become Prime Minister tomorrow. Boris Johnson will formally resign tomorrow, but there's no doubt about either of those things. They're definitely going to happen. And that will happen because earlier today, Liz Truss was declared the winner of the Conservative Party's leadership contest. She beat her rival, Rishi Sunak, by more than 20,000 votes. That gave her 57% of all of the eligible votes that were counted. She says she campaigned as a Conservative and she will govern as a Conservative. She's also promising to deliver what she calls a bold plan to cut taxes and grow the economy. And she's promising to deliver on help with energy bills and on the National Health Service. We know there may be a statement on Thursday concerning the energy crisis. Well, as I was mentioning, on Tuesday, tomorrow, she's going to travel to meet the Queen at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire to complete the transfer of power, and that will end Boris Johnson's 3 years as Prime Minister. Well, let's talk about the cost of living crisis, which is primarily being driven by energy prices, and speak to Oksana Ishchuk, who's a Ukrainian energy expert and an executive director at the Centre for Global Studies. Let's bring you in, Oksana. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Given that there is global pressure on the energy market at the moment, what do you think Liz Truss can do from the UK's perspective to ease the pressure being felt here?
First of all, we'd like to say that manipulation of gas prices is the favorite game of Gazprom on the European gas market. It was first observed during the gas crisis in Ukraine in 2008, but the consequences of gas crisis was not taken into account by Europe about 10 years ago. So now Gazprom practices the same tools to European markets that it was used in Ukraine. Of course, the gas prices are rising, and that's why the cost of living is rising, and the recession is before us. but we should understand that it is the blackmail and it is the manipulation with volumes of supply and with the routes of supply, because the capacity of Ukrainian gas.
Well, let me just interrupt to say that the Russians deny using gas as a weapon of war, but they've been criticised by a number of senior figures within the European Union for doing just that. And evidently you think Gazprom, the major Russian gas supplier, is manipulating the prices for political effect. I guess the question is, with uncertainty around pricing and uncertainty around Russian supply, what can Ukraine, for example, do to make this situation easier for the rest of Europe?
The capacity of Ukrainian gas transmission system is 140 billion cubic meters. It's the capacity of Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream. So to say directly, the Ukrainian route could replace the Nord Stream 1 and Turk Stream, but it was the decision of Gazprom not to supply the gas through Ukraine, but supply it in bypassing route. So for now, Ukraine as and its operator of gas transmission system could provide additional transition capacities transmission capacities to transit more, but it is the decision of Gazprom not to transit through Ukrainian route. So Ukraine as a transit country is open to resolve this crisis.
So you're saying Ukraine can play a greater role in delivering gas to Europe, that you've got storage that could be used by Europe, but that the Russians are opting not to send gas via Ukraine. But isn't the point here that there's nothing Ukraine and the European Union can do about this? If the Russians don't want to push gas through your country, there's nothing you can do to force Vladimir Putin or Gazprom to change that approach.
Europe has some capacities of regasification terminals to obtain more gas in LNG form from US, for example, or from Qatar. But of course, the biggest volumes of gas supply will come after 2024. If to say about this heating season, of course, there is not a lot of tools to do with deficit of gas provoked by Russia, but LNG could be helpful in this way.
And let's talk about the situation in your country, in Ukraine at the moment, because we've been talking about the cost of living crisis in the UK, but of course, Ukrainians are going through so much this year with the war in particular. But is the price of energy in Ukraine also escalating, also going up very rapidly at this difficult time?
Here in Ukraine, we have a little bit another problems. We have problems to survive, not the problems to pay our bills for gas or for electricity. Every day we have air warnings from rocket attacks. So our government had made decision not to make the prices for household higher, so it will compensate the prices from the market level for households. But we should understand that a lot of people in Ukraine now have lost their works. If to say about for example, market of labor, today in Ukraine, one labor place has about 13 candidates for it. So a lot of people have no money simply to pay for these gas bills, electricity bills, and our government do everything possible to compensate and to help people to survive these difficult times.
Oksana, thank you very much for your time today. We appreciate it. That's Oksana Itchuk. Well, let's continue to bring you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And a reminder there, of course, from Oksana that people in Ukraine are not only dealing with all of the ramifications of the energy crisis, but of course are in a much more severe struggle with that Russian invasion as well. Well, I'm here in Downing Street as we continue the BBC's coverage of Liz Truss winning that Conservative Party leadership election. She beat Rishi Sunak, she took 57% of the vote. That means tomorrow Boris Johnson will formally resign as Prime Minister and Liz Truss will formally become the Prime Minister. She has an awful lot of different things to think about. Let's talk about the environment for a moment, because of course environmental factors, green considerations are part of the different calculations that Liz Truss is going to have to make as she responds to the cost of living crisis. Let's talk to Mark Lloyd, who's Chief Executive of the Rivers Trust. Mark, thank you very much for joining us here on the BBC. Some would argue that some green commitments need to be compromised in the short term to simply help people through the winter. Would you agree with that?
Well, I mean, obviously, I would completely disagree with that. I think that, you know, the way out of the cost of living crisis is for us to adopt green energy and to have a massive insulation program on our homes. Our homes are incredibly leaky and inefficient. You know, we need to do that anyway to respond to the climate crisis. And this is a great opportunity for us to accelerate that program, which would generate a huge amount of jobs and would address the cost of living crisis head on, particularly if you targeted at poorer homes. I also think there's huge economic opportunities in restoring our natural environments in river catchments and throughout the country. You know, there's been this phrase going around about build back wetter. And really, we need a lot more nature to be able to slow down the flow of water, to reduce flood risk, and to increase our resilience to droughts like the one that we're still struggling through at the moment. So I think there are great opportunities there for growing the economy and looking after the environment.
And help me get into the detail of the first half of your answer there, where you said you want to improve the quality of people's houses so they hold on to heat better, particularly via insulation. Talk to me in practical terms about how you would do that if you were in charge, if you were Liz Truss starting off as Prime Minister tomorrow.
Well, of course, I am an expert in rivers, but I mean, you know, it seems to me that the grants for people to insulate their homes and to pay people to come in and insulate their homes and make them more energy efficient. At the same time, we could make them more water efficient as well. We're one of the most wasteful countries in terms of water usage. You know, the market mechanisms for that I would leave to the economists and the experts on energy. But it strikes me that getting out of an energy crisis means, you know, using less and being less dependent on fossil fuels would be a really wise thing to do at the moment.
Let's also talk about rivers, which of course your organisation has named the Rivers Trust. You talked about the importance of biodiversity. I want to understand the challenges that people like you have putting this issue near the top when perhaps understandably governments, not just in this country but in other countries too, are preoccupied with the immediate need to help people pay their bills and have enough money to stay warm and to feed their families.
Yeah, I mean, it can feel like a fringe issue until you realise that water is absolutely essential for life, and it's part of our life support mechanisms and the ecosystems that go around rivers, which provide, you know, the nature in our catchments. So, you know, building back with more nature-based solutions, so more trees, restored soils, and more wetlands are absolutely vital for increasing our resilience to inevitable climate change, but also mitigating for climate change and ensuring that we have water supplies in the future. I mean, the biodiversity, climate and water crises that we're currently in, you know, make the cost of living crisis look like a walk in the park when you look at the projections for the future. So, you know, this immediate crisis is something, you know, we need to put in perspective and think, you know, things could get a whole lot worse unless we take a really serious and coordinated and collaborative approach to restoring nature in our catchments, to deploying these nature-based solutions, which could create, you know, thousands, hundreds of thousands of green jobs, provide a much needed income source for farmers and really restore nature to our landscape. We're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, and we've also got some of the dirtiest rivers and beaches in Europe.
Well, first of all, it's definitely worth saying that I think a lot of people would not consider the cost of living crisis a walk in the park in the context of anything. But taking your focus on the biodiversity issue, you've just painted a very bleak picture of how it is here in the UK. Why is it like that? Why is there a biodiversity crisis? How far back do we have to go to understand why this has happened, in your view?
Well, I think in terms of rivers, there's two principal threats. One is water. It's principally about water quality, although there are quantity issues as well. Agriculture is a major polluter. How we manage our land is reflected in the quality of our river ecosystems, and we're doing that very badly. We've tried there's been lots of irrational government subsidies which have led to problems. There is a big opportunity coming out of the EU to do.
But hold on a minute. Before you talk about irrational government subsidies, isn't it correct that actually since Brexit has occurred and the government has reset the way that finances work around farming, the government has brought in much more ambitious environmental targets that previously existed? Some of those targets were welcomed by environmental campaigners.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think, but we need to coordinate that a lot better. We've got a problem with initiative-itis. We've got the 25-year environment plan that sets out some really bold ambitions to leave the environment in a better state for the next generation, which is absolutely essential in my view. But in order to do that, we need to coordinate efforts much better. We've got a whole load of plans out there which don't speak to each other. And we need to have a guiding mind around land use framework, land use planning, to ensure that we hold back the flow of water when we've got too much, and that to retain it so that we've got enough for when we don't have enough, which is what we've just been through recently.
Mark Lloyd, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Mark Lloyd is the Chief Executive of the Rivers Trust. He was alluding to planning policy. One of the things that we're going to be keeping a very close eye on as Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister and appoints her cabinet is how will she go about planning with reference to house building. The Conservatives have promised to build thousands and thousands of houses, but by their own admission have not met some of those house building targets. It connects to local planning decisions too. It will be interesting to see how Liz Truss approaches that. Now, stay with me here on BBC News. We'll continue our coverage of Liz Truss winning the Conservative Party's leadership contest. Let's, though, turn to the weather. Here's my colleague, Darren Baird.
Hello there. For many parts of the UK today, it's going to be dry and there'll be some warm sunshine as well. Over the weekend, it was a weekend of contrast. Much wetter in western areas close to low pressure. 4 inches of rain falling on Dartmoor. For many eastern parts of England, it was completely dry and temperatures reached 26 degrees. We did get some rain, though, overnight, even across some eastern parts of the UK, and over 36,000 lightning strikes as well. And we're seeing some more heavy showers developing at the moment, and this is where we've got the greatest risk of some more thunderstorms from now until the early hours of Tuesday morning, although there could be 1 or 2 storms elsewhere. This was the rain, though, that cleared away from overnight, moving away from Scotland, but it's here in the south that we've seen those showers developing. Those will turn heavy, potentially thundery, and drift their way northwards across southern England into parts of Wales and into the Midlands as well. But to the north of that, particularly across Yorkshire, Lincolnshire and East Anglia, temperatures are going to be very warm, 26, 27 degrees here. But through this evening then, we're looking at these showers breaking out here in the south. The risk of some thunderstorms once again and lightning, and they drift their way northwards all the way up towards Scotland. Somewhat clearer skies following on behind as it dries off across England and Wales. Maybe 1 or 2 mist and fog patches as well, and warm temperatures 14 or 15 degrees. Now we're seeing the northern lights over the past couple of nights in northern Scotland. This was the view last night. The aurora activity is lesser tonight, and there may well be more cloud around as well. And still some showery bursts of rain to start the day in Scotland and also the north of England. Then we're going to find this slice of drier weather and some sunshine before more rain sweeps up from the southwest into parts of Wales, the Midlands and across the southeast of England. Those downpours could be heavy and thundery once again. So probably not quite as warm tomorrow, still making 23 or 24 degrees at very best. Now, the main driver of the weather over the weekend and through the rest of this week is this area of low pressure, and it's going to move from the west towards the east right over the UK. It will cut off that supply of warmer air, and also the winds may not be quite so strong. But we're left with some sunshine, but we're also going to find some showers or some longer spells of rain developing, and that rain could turn heavy and thundery once again. So typical temperatures on Wednesday are going to be around 20 or 21 Celsius.
Hello, I'm Ros Atkins. This is BBC News. Our lead story is that Liz Truss has been chosen as the new Conservative leader and will now succeed Boris Johnson as Prime Minister tomorrow. She won the backing of the Conservative Party's members, beating Rishi Sunak, taking 57% of the vote. And she's now promised to govern as a Conservative and deliver what was promised to voters.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
Of course, the cost of living crisis is likely to dominate a very full in-tray when Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister. That will officially happen tomorrow. We'll hear from voters about their concerns and priorities.
Well, I really think that she needs to sort out this energy crisis. I mean, us low-paid workers, we're having real problems.
I think she'll do as good a job as she can. I'm sure she will, but there's a terrible mess, isn't there, everywhere.
The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has said the UK will always be a friend of France, despite occasional errors made by its leaders. And this afternoon, Boris Johnson used a few words of French to try and allay any doubts about relations.
And I'm Ben Brown with today's other main stories this hour. Police in Canada are hunting two men suspected of a mass killing in which 10 people were stabbed to death and 15 others injured. The High Court begins 5 days of hearings over the British government's plans to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. And from today, millions of people in England and Scotland are being invited for their autumn COVID booster vaccine.
Good afternoon. Welcome to BBC News. Welcome to Downing Street. It is still home to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, but tomorrow, Tuesday, Liz Truss will be taking over as Prime Minister. That was after, earlier on, around lunchtime, she was declared winner of the Conservative Party's leadership contest, and we were told that she'd beaten her rival Rishi Sunak by more than 20,000 votes. That equated to 57% of all the votes cast by Conservative Party members. She then took to the stage and told a big crowd that she had campaigned as a Conservative and will govern as a Conservative. She also promised to deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow the economy, and she promised to deliver help with energy bills and on the National Health Service. In fact, we think there may be a statement on the energy crisis on Thursday, though that's yet to be confirmed. Tomorrow, though, she will travel to meet the Queen at Balmoral in Aberdeenshire to complete the transfer of power, bringing Boris Johnson's three-year premiership to an end. I should say Boris Johnson is also making that journey to see the Queen. And already, Boris Johnson has congratulated his successor on what he called her decisive win. He said she has the right plan to tackle the cost of living crisis, unite our party, and continue the great work of uniting and levelling up our country. Now, says Boris Johnson, is the time for all Conservatives to get behind her 100%. Well, let's continue our coverage with this report from our political correspondent, Helen Catt, who's been watching the day's developments.
Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak together as candidates for the last time. The votes of Conservative members already counted, the winner already decided. To a packed hall in Westminster, the man overseeing the contest announced the final result.
Rishi Sunak, 60,399. Liz Truss, 81,326. Therefore, I give notice that Liz Truss is elected as the leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. We'll come up on stage.
For Liz Truss, a victory speech.
During this leadership campaign, I campaigned as a Conservative and I will govern as a Conservative. And my friends, we need to show that we will deliver over the next 2 years. I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
And she paid tribute to the man she's about to replace.
Boris, you got Brexit done. You crushed Jeremy Corbyn. You rolled out the vaccine and you stood up to Vladimir Putin. You were admired from Kiev to Carlisle.
The former Chancellor Rishi Sunak had led the initial ballot of Conservative MPs. His defeat when voting was widened out to the members had been predicted, but the result was closer than some had expected. Liz Truss now has the top job in her party, which she will need to reunite after a bruising contest.
We all need to turn our attention very swiftly to supporting the new Prime Minister and her new team in delivering for the British people, and particularly now with everything we've got going on, particularly with inflation and cost of living, the challenges that they present. I think that's what the public will expect, and I think that's what everyone, myself included, will do.
And tomorrow, she moves in here, taking the top job in the country, with a to-do list arguably more challenging than any recent Prime Minister. As the Labour leader on a visit to a school in North London was quick to point out.
She needs to deal with the cost of living crisis, she needs to deal with the fact the NHS is on its knees, and she needs to deal with the collapse of law and order. And there can be no justification for not freezing energy prices. So she needs to show that she actually understands and can meet the challenges that are there after 12 years of failure of this Tory government.
There's been criticism of how long this contest has taken to appoint a new leader. Nominations among MPs opened 8 weeks ago, and critics say that's left a vacuum at a crucial time when people are facing soaring costs. Liz Truss has promised she will move quickly and will set out her plans for help within days of taking office. She may be enjoying this moment, but the hard work starts now. Helen Catt, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's bring in the Conservative journalist and commentator Joanne Nadler, who's live with us. Joanne, thanks for your time today. Before we get into what's coming for Liz Truss, just a quick word about the process. It's been almost 2 months since Boris Johnson indicated he would resign. Has it been too long?
I think it has. I think it has because the party is in government. It's actually been useful to the Conservative Party in previous leadership elections when it's been in opposition to actually have a lengthy process. But I think given what has appeared to have been a vacuum in leadership, particularly over the last 2 to 3 weeks, I would argue, I think this process has gone on too long. And I think the party would do well to review going forward, should it be in this situation again, how it might make changes to that. And one thing I suggest would be perhaps to reverse the system that we've seen so that the party members the party members had the final say, because we've had several weeks of hearing very similar messages from the two main front runners. But in a way, we whizzed through some of those earlier candidates who were very strong and about whom we didn't hear so much.
Well, we'll see if Liz Truss turns to that matter, or Sir Graham Brady, who's overseen the whole process. But they could be forgiven for not focusing on that on day one of Liz Truss's leadership, because, of course, she has the pressing matter of the cost of living crisis. Do you think there's a tension now between the state intervention, which may be needed to control people's bills in the short term, and Liz Truss's inclination, which is for small state and less state intervention?
Well, I think given the extent of what is widely perceived as being an emergency and a crisis, we won't see so much of that tension, because I think actually put under a microscope, Liz Truss in office has been fairly pragmatic. So she's talked a very good free market line during the course of this leadership election, because she knows who she needs to appeal to in terms of the members for the final vote. But I think now she is a realistic politician, and she's bound to know that the next week is absolutely critical, not only for her survival as leader, but I think in many ways it's an existential few days for the Conservative Party. It really needs to show that it's got a grip on this crisis. Otherwise, that 10-point lead that the Labour Party has had consistently will only gain momentum.
Joanne, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Joanne Nadler there saying the Conservative Party may face an existential crisis if it doesn't respond correctly to the cost of living crisis. That is what awaits Liz Truss when she takes over on Tuesday. Now, if you want ongoing coverage of Liz Truss's victory, of course, you can get it right here on BBC News. Some of you will be watching through the BBC News app or the BBC News website, and there you can also find our live page, which is pulling in updates all of the time as the day goes on. You can find that through bbc.com/news or download the app onto your smartphone. And as she becomes Prime Minister, of course, the whole country is going to get to know Liz Truss much better, but it's not like we haven't known her before. She's been a senior politician within the Conservatives for some time now. Let's look at what we already know about the next Prime Minister, who will become Britain's third female Prime Minister. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, has this report.
She's a grafter. She means what she says, she knows what she wants, and she gets it.
These are some of Liz Truss's most supportive friends. Activists in her Norfolk constituency have nothing but praise for their MP, the next Prime Minister.
The job is so important to her, getting done what she wants to get done.
There's no airs and graces about Liz. She's just, as you see, she's got the skin of a rhinoceros when it comes to putting up with people having a go at her, I can assure you.
Several times over the years, colleagues have predicted that Liz Truss's career was on a downward path, that she'd soon be spending more time here in Norfolk than in Westminster. But friends say she's always been underestimated, and her survival is evidence of a clever politician with a steely determination. Her political journey has taken her from a family she describes as left-wing, where she joined her parents in the campaign for unilateral nuclear disarmament, to Oxford University, where she was a Liberal Democrat and took to the conference stage to argue in favour of abolishing the monarchy.
We Liberal Democrats believe in opportunity for all. We believe in fairness and common sense.
After graduating, she joined the Conservatives, worked as an accountant and was selected to fight the safe Tory seat of South West Norfolk. But her political career was almost derailed when news emerged of an affair with an MP. She fought off attempts to oust her and was elected to Parliament in 2010. She was quickly promoted first to Education Minister. Those who worked with her back then say she was always across the detail.
One of the things that successful teams need is someone who really believes in an idea, and Liz really believes in a lot of very big ideas. When I worked for her, we called her the Minister for Maths, and this was a real focal point. She can create a team through her beliefs, through her passion, through her evangelism for important ideas.
Her first cabinet job was Environment Secretary. It was obvious, though, that some work would be needed on her presentational skills.
We import 2/3 of our cheese. That is a disgrace.
Liz.
When the Brexit referendum was called, she campaigned to stay in the EU, something she later said was wrong. Nicola Horlick, a Liberal Democrat, was part of that Remain team.
For somebody to say, you know, I had this conviction about one thing and the next day, actually, I was wrong about that and I've now got a different conviction. When it seems that that's just about getting power, that really concerns me.
You don't agree with Liz Truss on lots of things. Do you think she's got any qualities that would make her a decent Prime Minister?
You've got this person who's very disciplined, very well organised, but is lacking on the communication and charisma side.
But friends say she does know how to get her message across, and her Instagram posts show her playful side. Ruder colleagues think her love of a photo opportunity betrays a superficiality. She was certainly mocked for this regal pose last Christmas. Her promotion to Foreign Secretary has given her a global platform. Some think there are less than subtle echoes of Margaret Thatcher, a comparison she loves. Liz Truss will be Britain's third female Prime Minister. Life for her, her husband and 2 daughters is about to change, and no one's underestimating the challenges that lie ahead. Vicky Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, let's consider what Liz Truss's leadership of the country may mean for Londoners. Joining me live now on BBC News is the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan. Thank you very much indeed for your time. I wonder what your expectations are of a Liz Truss premiership.
Well, firstly, I want to congratulate Liz Truss on being elected the Conservative leader today and our Prime Minister from tomorrow. We come clearly from different political traditions, but I think we share a common desire to see our capital city succeeding and our country succeeding. But she takes over during a time of national crisis in families, in communities and businesses. They've seen economic pain they've not seen since the 2008 worldwide banking crash, and even worse than the pandemic. So it's really important that this week we see urgent plans from the Prime Minister, how she'll respond to soaring inflation and the rising cost of energy.
And she's indicated that she's going to give us details of her plan for the energy crisis in the coming days. Do you think it was reasonable for the Conservative Party to wait for this process to play out before the new Prime Minister was the person leading the response to this?
Well, for the last 2 months, we've seen a combination of a zombie government and candidates distracted by tribal party politics. In the meantime, I've been speaking to parents, mum and dad, skipping a meal so their kids can eat, speaking to pensioners who've not turned the fan on during this heat wave because they're concerned about their bills. We've seen the consequences of climate change with a heat wave and with droughts, and all the time the government missing in action. If Liz Truss is going to be continuity Boris Johnson, that's a problem for us. What we need from the Prime Minister this week are plans how she'll respond to this national crisis. And that includes, by the way, to stop being anti-London, to put aside the culture wars and work together in the national interest rather than the narrow party political interest.
Well, I've never heard Boris Johnson or Liz Truss say they're anti-London, and she says that she's going to give us full details of the cost of living crisis plan in the coming days. So we shall see what that plan is. Mr. Khan, can I also ask you about the report that came out last week from Sir Tom Windsor looking into the departure of Cressida Dick from the Metropolitan Police? It described your actions as unjustifiably politically brutal and the manner of her departure entirely unacceptable and fair. Do you accept any of the criticisms of how you carried on?
No, I don't. We had in London public confidence in the Met Police Service plummeting to record levels when the former commissioner was in post. A litany of scandals from racism, misogyny, sexism, homophobia, and the former commissioner unable to come up with a plan to respond to those serious issues, addressing the serious issues shown by the police watchdog report, or to win back the trust and confidence. And this report from Tom Windsor is a combination of bias and him not looking at the complete facts.
But Mr. Khan, the report isn't saying that it wasn't within your rights to have concerns about the state of the Metropolitan Police or the leadership of the Metropolitan Police. The critique is of how you went about addressing those concerns and that you didn't follow the correct process, that you called in Cressida Dick, gave her an hour to decide whether she was going to quit or not, and put her in an impossible situation, undermining the correct processes which should be followed.
It's simply not true. It's simply not true. But firstly, I've got to say, Parliament has given police and crime commissioners the power to hold the police to account. That's why we're elected, and I don't apologise for holding the former commissioner to account. And it's not true, the version of events in Tom Windsor's biased report.
Mr. Khan, thank you for your time today on BBC News. There's the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, live with us. And if you want more background on that Tom Windsor report, you can find that through the BBC News website. Well, let's turn back to Liz Truss's victory, announced today just down the road from Downing Street by Sir Graham Brady, chair of the 1922 committee, which has overseen the contest. Liz Truss defeated the other candidate, Rishi Sunak, a man who had been Chancellor under Boris Johnson until he resigned, an act which was part of those 48 hours which led to Boris Johnson saying he would step down. He's been speaking since that defeat. He says he wants to carry on serving as an MP and wants to defend his seat in the Commons at the next general election. He's been speaking to the BBC's political editor, Chris Mason.
Rishi Sunak, commiserations. Your reaction to your defeat, how are you?
Well, I'm really proud of the campaign that I ran, and I'm grateful to everyone who supported me. But the priority now has got to be to get behind Liz Truss, our new leader, and she will have my full support as the new Conservative government gets on with delivering for the British people.
What does it say about the party that you were so popular amongst your own MPs and yet less so among the membership? It suggests there's a division there.
Well, look, I'm proud of the campaign that I ran, but that's in the past now. I respect the result. Liz has won, and I'd say to everyone, we'll get behind Liz. She's the new leader, and the new government's got to get on with delivering for the British people, and that's what I'll be doing. Liz will have my full support.
If you're offered a job in Liz Truss's cabinet, would you accept?
You know, it's not what I'm focused on. And what I can say is that Liz Truss will have my full support as the new government gets on with delivering for people.
Full support, but you're not willing to serve her?
Well, it's just, look, these things that, A, they're not for me, but also it's just not something I'm thinking about. I mean, I'm proud of the campaign that we ran, grateful to everyone for their support, but the priority now has got to be to get behind Liz Truss. She's our new leader, and there are challenges that the country faces. The government's got to get on and deliver on those, and Liz will have my full support as she does that.
Given what you've been saying over the summer, very fervently disagreeing with her economic prospectus, how could you credibly vote for that prospectus when it comes forward in Parliament? Will you be able to?
Well, actually, Liz has said very clearly that she is going to provide support for households through the winter, and that's a good thing. And I think that's something that I'm glad she has said, and she mentioned that she'll bring forward those plans soon, which is great, because obviously many people are going to struggle, and it's right that they get some help through that. But I said these debates are in the past, and I'm proud of the campaign that I ran, but we've got to look forward now. Liz is going to have my full support as a new government gets on with delivering for people.
What do you do now personally in the next couple of days, weeks, months? You must be exhausted. Is it time for a holiday, time with family?
Well, I actually felt I'm going to head to Parliament pretty soon after this because we have votes this evening and I plan to be voting in them. So that's the immediate priority.
And you see a political career going forward beyond the next election?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm very committed to my constituents in North Yorkshire at home, and as long as they'll continue to have me, I plan to keep serving them, not just in the immediate future, but also at the next election. So that's my plan. I don't plan on going anywhere. It's a real privilege to be their Member of Parliament. There's lots I can continue, I hope, to deliver for them, and that's what I plan on doing.
Do you still have political ambition and desire to serve in high office at some point?
Well, it's a real privilege to have had the job that I've had, to have been Chancellor at a time of enormous difficulty for our country, and I'm proud of my record as Chancellor, helping safeguard our economy through the biggest shock it experienced in something like 300 years, and I still remember all the predictions of what was going to happen, but because of the actions that we took and the incredible tenacity and bravery and creativity of our businesses and families, we did get through it and kept unemployment very low, and I'm proud of my part in making that happen. But as I said, I'm now going to be focused on supporting my constituents first and foremost in North Yorkshire and continuing to be their Member of Parliament as long as they'll have me, and giving Liz Truss my full support as the new Conservative government gets on with grappling with the challenges ahead of us now.
Final question. Can you reassure our viewer, who will have heard you over the summer trashing Liz Truss's prospectus for government, that she can actually now be a Prime Minister that can deliver for millions of people who are desperately worried about the state of the economy?
Yes, of course I can give them that reassurance. And these leadership elections obviously highlight differences or emphasise differences, but there's far more that unites.
You thought she was irresponsible.
There's far more that unites Liz and I than we disagree on. And as she said, she's going to bring forward plans very quickly to support people through the winter. I think that's right, and I look forward to seeing those. And Liz will have my full support as the new government delivers for the British people.
Thank you.
There's our political editor, Chris Mason, speaking with Rishi Sunak, the defeated candidate in this two-candidate final stage of the Conservative Party's leadership election. So it'll be tomorrow that Liz Truss becomes Prime Minister formally. Let's bring in our security correspondent, Frank Gardner. And Frank, Liz Truss has to pick up where Boris Johnson left off in terms of the UK's relationship with Ukraine, and in particular its support as Ukraine faces down Russia. Do you imagine there being any pressure on that relationship with a change of Prime Minister?
Well, the Ukrainians have already reacted. President Zelensky took a few hours to react, but then he has come out with a statement thanking his great friend Boris Johnson for all the support that Boris Johnson gave to this country, being one of the very first major European nations to show Ukraine its support against the Russian invasion. He also said that he looks forward to continuing the relationship with Britain's new leader. Ukrainian bloggers have already started circulating a kind of highly romanticized picture, or a very flattering picture, I have to say, of Liz Truss dressed in kind of black, shiny medieval armor with the words in Ukrainian beneath it, Nova Zalidna Lady, meaning new Iron Lady. They see her as a kind of reincarnated Lady Thatcher, which I'm sure will probably go down quite well in number 10. Remember that Ukraine is a country that may not feel like it here on the streets of Kyiv today at the capital, but it is a country at war, and they know that they are dependent on Western and NATO support if they're going to keep resisting this Russian invasion, which is slowly nibbling up bits of their eastern territories in the Donbass. And I think Ukrainians are acutely aware that the cost of living crisis in Europe it threatens to undermine the support. And I think what they're most afraid of is that some countries, France, Germany possibly, are eventually going to say, look, our people can't support this any longer. You're going to have to do a deal with President Putin. And that means making some kind of compromise that leaves him in control of the territory he's already seized. That's what they're afraid of. So they're calling for Ukraine's allies, including Britain, to be robust, to stick with it and keep supporting them throughout what's going to be a very tough winter for both Europe and Ukraine.
And Frank, help me understand what sticking with it means. We know in the first 6 months of this conflict, the UK has committed billions in military support for the Ukrainians. Is that seen as being a satisfactory level, or is there an expectation from Ukraine that the UK and the West actually needs to be providing more this winter?
Whatever the West provides them is never going to be enough. They always ask for more. They submit these massive great lists, these wish lists of saying we want this and this and this, and then it gets sent back by various European and NATO governments saying, okay, we hear you, but we can give you this bit. And already Western armories have depleted themselves massively by sending a lot of their best kit. You know, this city I'm speaking to you from, Kyiv, was only a few miles from here. The Russian armoured columns, if you remember, had got this close to the outskirts of Kyiv. It threatened to overrun it, but it was British and Swedish and Western supplied weaponry, American particularly, javelins and NLAWs, that kept that Russian armour, those tanks and artillery at bay, and stopped them from overrunning this city. The Ukrainians know that they can't do this without Western military help. If they're going to have a successful counteroffensive, which they've launched in the south, to try and drive the Russians out of the one big city they've captured, Kherson. If that's going to work, they need that arms supply to continue. So far, it is working. So things like HIMARS, the high mobility artillery rocket systems that the Americans have provided them, the MLRS, the multiple launch rocket systems that Britain has provided them, these things are having a massive effect on Russia's ability to fight this war. They're hitting the Russian ammo dumps, the missile dumps that have been wreaking such havoc in Ukrainian cities. They're hitting them from miles and miles away, and that's keeping the Russians at bay. But if you stop that, then Russia will succeed and take more and more of this country.
Frank Gardner, live with us from Kyiv. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Plaid Cymru's leaders have warned that the nomination of Liz Truss would lead to more fervent calls for Scottish and Welsh independence. Let's understand this further with the leader of Plaid Cymru, Adam Price, who's live with us here on BBC News. Mr. Price, thank you very much indeed. I wonder what your emotions were as you saw that Liz Truss had won, that she would be becoming the next Prime Minister?
Well, you've got to hope, haven't you, that in the grips of this national crisis, that the new Prime Minister would bring with her new ideas, new vision, new action, and with that new hope for so many families tonight that are in the grips of uncertainty. So you've got to hope that, but I mean, the evidence so far is not very positive, is it? Because I mean, at the moment, what we've got is
Mr. Price, that's not particularly reasonable. She only was chosen at lunchtime, and she's already said she's planning on providing more details. It's being briefed probably by the end of the week. That doesn't feel unreasonable, given she's not even Prime Minister yet.
Yes, but even the interview that she gave, courtesy of the BBC at the weekend, she reiterated the line that she has. She has repeated again and again and again during the leadership campaign, which is a kind of, a stale, reheated Thatcherism, if you like. I mean, levelling up. She's Sadiq Khan, she said she's continuity Johnson, but what she's done is actually with levelling up, she's turned it upside down. It's trickle-down economics, the kind of economic policy we had in Thatcher and Reagan in the 1980s doesn't work. The idea that you actually create economic growth by giving tax cuts to the rich, and then the rest of us somehow survive on the crumbs from the rich man's table. It's not only immoral, it actually doesn't work in terms of pure economics as well. The multiplier effect doesn't work by giving tax cuts to the rich.
Well, Mr. Price, first of all, we don't have details of Liz Truss's tax plans, and in the comments that I've seen her make in the last few weeks, she's promising tax cuts for a range of people, not only the richest in the country. But let me ask you specifically about the cost of living.
Hang on, a good point deserves a good response. She actually said in that interview with your colleague Laura Kunsberg that she accepts that the greater benefit, by far exponentially greater benefit, will lie with those that are already well off in our society. Now, how is that morally right?
Well, we're not going to get bogged down in that particular point, but as you know, that was a particular question about a particular aspect of policy. It was not a question about her broader philosophy, which is to, as you correctly state, reduce taxes. But on the point of the cost of living crisis, you clearly have expectations that she needs to come in and take decisive action immediately. What would you like to hear her announce towards the end of this week?
We need this week absolute commitment, not just freezing energy prices. That doesn't go far enough in our view. We need to slash energy prices back to the level they were pre-April, when we had the first surge in energy prices. Freezing is not enough, because they're already, I can tell you in the conversations that I'm having with families in Wales, they're already at an unaffordable level. So we've got to take them back to the price cap that existed pre the April surge, when the price cap was raised.
And
700.
if you did that, if you were in government and you did that for the whole of the UK, how would you pay for that?
We pay through two methods: a windfall tax on the energy companies, the likes of which that has been implemented in Germany and elsewhere, and also we would introduce a solidarity tax on those well-off that are able to pay for it, because we shouldn't be talking about tax cuts for the very wealthiest in society. We should be talking about the very wealthiest in our society showing solidarity, paying higher taxes, so that we can actually ensure that nobody dies this winter as a result of poor leadership here in Westminster.
Thanks for speaking to us, Mr. Price.
Thank you.
That's Adam Price, leader of Plaid Cymru. Now, next, we are going to Liz Truss's Norfolk constituency. Let's bring in Joe Black, who's live with us from Thetford. And Joe, I'm imagining that Conservative voters, at least, are excited by the prospect of having their local MP as the Prime Minister.
Absolutely. I've spoken to some people today who say this is really good news. It's really good news for Norfolk. She's hardworking, she's determined, she wants to get things done. I did bump into a Labour councillor who said he was absolutely horrified. He said we're all doomed, but he said he thought this might work in their favour in the next election. He said that she has no idea what the working person goes through. Well, we've spoken to some of those working people here in her constituency today. We've talked to them about the new Prime Minister, what they hope for on her national priorities and her local priorities. What would they like to see her do? And this is what they told us.
Especially living in an older house and with the gas, and yeah, that's going to be a killer for us, I think. Yeah. Going to have to tighten the belts on everything, but we'll get through it. We'll do it, definitely.
Obviously, she has been over here. We've seen over here last year. She's been here a couple of times and everything. And I hope she comes again and looks at the town. It's completely dead. You know, as you probably saw, the shops over there, everything is closed. And yeah, I hope everything goes all right in everybody's favour. You know, it'll be nice.
Everything's going up, literally. I mean, I'm lucky. I've only got 2 years left on my mortgage, but for the people that are just starting out, the mortgage repayments are going to be absolutely ridiculous.
So there you go, the cost of living also an issue here in Thetford. And people saying this is good for Norfolk, but some people also saying it's good for the region of East Anglia. The Eastern Powerhouse, which is a consortium of CEOs from around this region and other interested parties, wrote an open letter to Liz Truss before she was announced actually as the new Tory leader. They said that they wanted better levelling up funds and they wanted better investment in rails and roads, and they want the life sciences here in this region, which are in Norwich and Cambridge and other places, to be more joined up so that they can be more effective. The people here, though, talking about whether or not they're worried that she will have too many national priorities in order to look after them. Some say they are worried, some say they're not, but her team were on the radio this morning saying that, of course, they will be working hard, even though she has all these national priorities, and that when she's back in the constituency, they will manage her time effectively so they can look after the constituents' issues that matter to them.
Joe, thank you very much indeed. There's Joe live with us from Thetford, where some people have got the bunting out by the looks of things. Now, let's leave politics to one side just for a moment and catch up on the weather with my colleague Darren Baird.
Hello there. For many northern parts of the UK, it's going to be dry this afternoon with some warm sunshine. We are seeing some showers, though, developing here in southern parts of England. Those will drift their way into Wales, parts of the Midlands, could turn heavy and thundery later. But ahead of it, it's going to be particularly warm across a good part of northern England, temperatures reaching 26 or even 27 degrees here. But these heavier downpours developing in the south, and particularly in the southwest Wales and parts of the Midlands, could turn heavy and thundery. Everything is drifting its way northwards on that southerly breeze. Some clearer skies following to the south, and a warm night, temperatures perhaps no lower than 14 or 15 degrees. Tomorrow we're going to keep some rain on and off through much of the day in Scotland and for a while in the far north of England. Then we've got this slice of drier weather with some sunshine, but more rain is developing and pushing in from the southwest towards Wales, the Midlands, and eventually in the southeast of England. And again, the risk of some heavy rain and some thunderstorms continues. Not quite as warm tomorrow, top temperatures 23 or 24 Celsius.
Hello again, good evening. You are watching BBC News with me, Ben Brown. Our latest headlines. Liz Truss has been chosen as the new Conservative Party leader and will now succeed Boris Johnson as Britain's next Prime Minister.
I will deliver a bold plan to cut taxes and grow our economy. I will deliver on the energy crisis, dealing with people's energy bills, but also dealing with the long-term issues we have on energy supply.
Well, the cost of living is likely to dominate a full in-tray when she becomes Prime Minister officially, and that is tomorrow. We hear from voters about their main concerns.
Well, I really think that she needs to sort out this energy crisis. I mean, us low-paid workers, we're having real problems.
I think she'll do as good a job as she can. I'm sure she will, but there's a terrible mess, isn't there, everywhere.
Well, since the news of Liz Truss's victory has come in, there's been reaction from leaders around the world who have been congratulating her, among them the President of the European Union Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who congratulated her, saying the EU and the UK are partners. We may face many challenges together, from climate change to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I look forward, said Ursula von der Leyen, to a constructive relationship in full respect of our agreements. And that could be a key point in their relationship. Let's get more on this with our correspondent Jessica Parker, who's in Brussels. Is it fair to say there's despite all the words of congratulation, there's a level of distrust amongst EU leaders of Liz Truss, Britain's latest Conservative leader?
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly here in Brussels, and when you're talking about the European Commission, which is the executive arm of the EU and the institution that Ursula von der Leyen heads up, there is an element of distrust because there's history there. Namely, Liz Truss has been in charge of trying to renegotiate post-Brexit trading arrangements for Northern Ireland over this year, and it went from a point where she seemed to establish relatively cordial relations with the counterpart here at the European Commission to actually finding that she said there was no further ground to be covered. The EU was being too intransigent in terms of its ability to reform the Northern Ireland Protocol, and she kick-started this legislation that could see potentially parts of that treaty overwritten. Didn't go down well here in the EU. They launched fresh legal action. And there's a possibility down the line, if things escalate, if negotiations don't resume and they don't reach some agreement, that you could find something of a trade war between the EU and the UK, although that is still some way off as a prospect. But Liz Truss, a known quantity here in Brussels, but as I say, there is some baggage because of those reasons I've just outlined. But I think it's worth pointing out as well that whilst there are people here in Brussels, some diplomats, Commission officials who might not be overly keen on her recent approach to post-Brexit arrangements, there are maybe some countries, particularly towards the east in the European Union, where you've seen some quite heartfelt congratulations today. They have liked the UK's approach to Ukraine, what's seen as a strong stance against Russian aggression. They know Liz Truss because she's the Foreign Secretary. So I think there are kind of nuanced elements in terms of the European reaction to Liz Truss becoming the Conservative Party leader and therefore soon Prime Minister as well.
And you mentioned the Northern Ireland Protocol, and I said in the introduction that Ursula von der Leyen from the EU Commission had said in her message of congratulations to Liz Truss, I look forward to a constructive relationship in full respect of our agreements. And it sounds like the subtext of that is that she fears, Ursula von der Leyen fears, that Liz Truss might not respect EU agreements and might indeed trigger Article 16 and suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol.
So yeah, there have been reports that Liz Truss could use Article 16 to look to suspend parts of the protocol. But I think also they see this bit of legislation, the Northern Ireland Protocol Bill, not to get too techie about the whole thing, but that could also disapply parts of the treaty. They see that as a direct contravention of what's been agreed. So that's kind of already in train, and worth pointing out as well that parts of that treaty are still yet to actually be properly applied. So the EU is consistently annoyed on a number of areas as to areas of the protocol that they feel is either under threat from being applied or not being applied in the first place. But I think you're absolutely right. That is what Ursula von der Leyen is getting at. I was at a press conference earlier today with the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell, who said something similar, but said that he hoped EU-UK relations could improve because there have been serious strains since the UK left the European Union. And then, of course, there were those comments that Liz Truss made during the campaign when asked if Emmanuel Macron, the French president, obviously a big figure in terms of the EU, was a friend or foe. And she said something along the lines of the jury's still out on that. I think that didn't go down that well here. They felt she was playing to the gallery, but they want to see what she'll actually do now in office.
Jess, thank you very much indeed. And let's go back to Westminster now and get some analysis from our political correspondent Ione Wells, who can join me now as well. And of course, Ione, the victory of Liz Truss was widely anticipated. Most commentators had assumed that's what was going to happen, in fact. But she got 57% of the members in terms of the vote, and that is less than a lot of people had been expecting. Is that going to be a problem for her?
Well, Ben, that's right. There's sort of two key figures here. She got 50% of the eligible votes that were cast, but only 40% of overall Conservative Party members voted for Liz Truss. That is certainly a bit less than was expected. Just to sort of compare that to her predecessors, it was less than Boris Johnson had received, less than David Cameron received, and less than Ian Duncan-Smith received in those last contests. So certainly a closer result than perhaps anticipated, although, as you say, her win was not a surprise to anybody here in Westminster. Now, in terms of why this matters, I think Liz Truss herself hinted at this a little bit today. A lot of her speech and a lot of her supporters today at that result were mentioning unity. They need to unite the party. And that's not just because this result among Conservative Party members was quite close, but also remember the split in the parliamentary party as well among MPs. Even right at the end of this contest, after weeks and weeks and weeks of it, only 11 more Conservative MPs were publicly backing Liz Truss compared to those backing Rishi Sunak, and there were still dozens of Tory MPs who didn't declare their support for either of those candidates. This comes after, as we know, months of infighting within the party that led to this leadership contest in the first place. Now, some people watching this might say, well, why does this really matter? Aren't there bigger issues to worry about, like the cost of living, like the energy crisis at the moment? And those things are true, but the reason that this unity point is important is because, as Boris Johnson learnt the hard way, it is very difficult to pass policy. It's very easy to kind of land your message with the public if you are spending a lot of time talking about essentially yourself and about certain issues within the Conservative Party rather than the policies that you are putting out.
Just in terms of what she said after she heard she'd won, I mean, there wasn't a lot in her remarks. It wasn't a very long statement, but she did promise a bold plan in terms of tax cuts and the energy crisis. What did we learn from what she actually said?
That's right. So she hasn't reiterated any more kind of further detail on that plan. We do know that a plan is coming within the next 7 days. She plans to both outline how she will help households with bills, but also how she will address longer term issues of energy supply as well. Now, we are expecting that to come, as I say, in the next 7 days. We're told that an update has been penciled in for this Thursday, but the speech itself wasn't full of further detail of what exactly that support might look like. There were a couple of other interesting lines, though, points of clarity that we did get from her speech. One, I think, in particular that stood out, she talked about delivering or hoping to deliver victory for the party in 2024. That seemed to pour cold water on the idea that she might call an early election, which had been something that some commentators had been speculating about. But in terms of more detail on what support households might get, I think we are still going to have to wait a few more days for that.
I mean, there's just a line, Ione, on Reuters, who are quoting the Daily Express, saying Priti Patel has resigned as Home Secretary. I mean, I suppose, in a sense, there's a lot of speculation that Priti Patel isn't going to be Home Secretary under Liz Truss's government anyway, so perhaps not that seismically shocking.
That's right. I think we can expect a number of resignations really from government. It's quite sort of typical that people might choose to resign as opposed to be told that they are sacked, but certainly the next kind of big priority kind of politically for Liz Truss tomorrow, after she's made her speech, her first speech as Prime Minister after visiting the Queen, will be to appoint her new cabinet. And of course there are still discussions underway about this, but certainly some of those top jobs there have already been many discussions about, and it's widely anticipated that Suella Braverman will be appointed the next Home Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng much expected to be the next Chancellor. So there are already significant discussions underway about some of those top roles. James Cleverly as Foreign Secretary, also widely expected here in Westminster, and that's why, as you say, we may start to see some of these resignations come in over the next 24 hours. It's certainly going to be a big reshuffle that we're expecting tomorrow. I think one question and one key thing to look out for, though, will be whether she does appoint anybody who was from Team Sunak's camp among MPs. That's been something which certainly a couple of the sort of Sunak supporting MPs have been hoping for, as a way to essentially offer a kind of olive branch to those that didn't back her. However, there is clearly a question here about whether some of them would want to, given these were two candidates with very different visions for the economy and plans going forward.
And just briefly, never mind Team Sunak, what about Mr. Sunak himself? Is he going to be offered anything?
Well, he certainly seemed to have ruled himself out of serving in her government. He told our political editor, Chris Mason, just this evening that it was not something he was even thinking about. So I think the expectation is that he wouldn't want to serve in that government. He certainly has made this point before as well, that he had such a different vision for the economy that it would be quite hard to serve under somebody with a different outlook to himself. So currently that's not the expectation, although as ever with these things, anything could happen, and we will be providing updates as and when we get them tomorrow and into Wednesday as well.
I know you will. Ione, thank you very much indeed. Just to bring you up to date a bit more on that line, just coming in from Sam Lister, political editor at the Daily Express, saying that Priti Patel is resigning as Home Secretary and returning to the backbenches, but that very much unconfirmed at the moment. We will try to bring you more details on that. Well, our correspondent Fiona Trott is in Redcar and has been speaking to voters there about what they make of the new Conservative leader, soon to be the new and next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Fiona.
That's right. Yes, remember that Redcar was dubbed Bluecar after the 2019 election because for the first time people here voted for a Conservative MP. Here's why. High unemployment rates. Remember the SSI steelworks down the coast there closed in 2015 with a loss of more than 2,000 jobs. High child poverty rates too. People here said that they wanted change. That's what they voted for, and they promised so much, weren't they, with their levelling up agenda. In fact, you know, in recent times we've seen so much government investment in that old steelworks site, private investment too in clean energy. At the moment, a factory being built on that site to make parts for wind turbines out in the North Sea. But a lot has happened since the 2019 election, of course. A pandemic, a war in Europe, high inflation rates. So it's no surprise that when you speak to people here in Redcar, they say they haven't seen much change, or certainly have not felt it. And some of them say from what they have seen during the hustings, during the leadership campaign, they're not entirely sure, they're not entirely optimistic that that change will come.
I want honesty. I want them to come out and just say, right, this is the situation of our country right now. This is what we need to do. We need to help X, Y and Z regarding gas and electricity, but at the same time we're going to need to pay for it sometime next year. The reason why gas is going through the roof is because we failed as a government. They've been in charge now for, what, 12 years? They've done nothing with nuclear. They pulled back the solar benefit, they pulled back wind and the planning permissions. So we have nothing to support this country because the Conservatives decided to go with gas.
I want to be able to live. I want to be able to live comfortably. I don't want to be struggling to pay a bill at 59-year-olds. You know what I mean? I've got kids, I've got grandkids, and what's life going to be like for them in the future? They're going to end up with nothing. They're going to end up sitting in blankets like they did in the 50s, 40s, starving, sharing blankets and tins of corned beef. It's just not on. They need to sort themselves out.
Well, when you speak to business people here in the town, it's a different story. They say, yes, they're very worried about the future, but they do have faith in Liz Truss. But like the people we spoke to on the high street, they said that they want more detail. Of course, Liz Truss today saying there's a bold new plan to help with energy bills, but they're asking, does that include businesses too? She also spoke about growth. So like the people we spoke to who are out shopping today, they want more detail. You get the feeling that here in Redcar, the actual official announcement of a new leader wasn't very important. Some people said that they didn't even know it was happening today. For them, Westminster feels a million miles away from Redcar. The most important announcement for them is the one that is to come. More detail this week from Liz Truss on how they can feel more confident about their future.
Fiona, thank you very much indeed. And we're actually going to talk more about, in more detail, about what help the government may be able to give people with their energy bills. Sarah Pennells is consumer finance specialist at Royal London. Thank you very much for being with us. What do you think are the best options available to the government? Liz Truss has already said she's going to do something to help people with their energy bills. She's talked about a bold plan. We don't know quite yet what that bold plan is. What would you advise her to do?
Well, I think there are several options facing her. I think the real challenge is that none of them are perfect. Some of them will cost a lot of money. And there are questions about how you actually implement a number of them. So, for example, if we look back, first of all, at the help that's already been announced and due to come in October, that was announced by the former Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, Now, the view he took was he essentially gave people on a low income about 3 times more help than he gave to everybody. So we're all going to get this payment of £400, people on a lower income getting up to about £1,300. So if Liz Truss was to take that targeted approach and basically increase payments for people on the lowest incomes, who we know spend the most on energy, well, that might be a very effective use of money. But we do know that from what Liz Truss was saying, certainly earlier in her campaign, she showed some reluctance to talk in those terms and was focusing more on tax cuts. I mean, another idea that's been talked about quite a lot recently is this keeping the energy price cap or freezing the energy price cap. And there are 2 ways that could work. One is basically with the government paying. So the energy price cap stays at its current level of about £1,970 and the government pays the difference. Well, that could be very expensive. There are quite a few different figures flying around, but one from the Institute of Policy and Public Research is £45 billion. The other is that we as customers pay. So we pay that back over quite a long term. That could be maybe up to 10 years. So I think there's, the question of, first of all, where does the money come from? How targeted does she want to be? And if it is something that we're going to have to pay for, I don't really think back to when Rishi Sunak first announced this £200 rebate right at the start of the year. And it was something we were going to have to pay back over 4 years. And there was some disquiet even over that small amount. If the energy price cap is to be frozen and we pay that money back through our bills over coming years, we could be paying those bills, paying that difference over 10, maybe even more years, which may not go down well with some of the people that Liz Truss would like to think she's going to help.
I mean, there is speculation that there could be a kind of COVID-style scheme in terms of the amount of money that the government's going to spend on helping people with their energy bills, in terms of a freeze over many years, this kind of deficit scheme, which could cost tens of billions of pounds.
Absolutely. And I mean, Liz Truss has already said that she wants to reverse the national insurance rise. She has talked about cutting taxes. So I think the question is how that money is spread, if it is going to be on a similar scale to the support we got with COVID. And I think secondly is how targeted the help will be, because Liz Truss has said herself that she thinks that reversing the national insurance rise would be fair, but we know that that will benefit those. I mean, by definition, it's people who pay the most national insurance. That's the wealthiest people. And the same with a tax cut. I mean, if you have somebody who's currently on the minimum wage, for example, and if you cut taxes across the board by 1%, which may or may not be something that Liz Truss is considering, that would leave that person roughly £60 a year better off, so about £1 a week. So I think that the things that have already been either announced or discussed during the hustings and the leadership campaign, they aren't very targeted. And certainly before the prime ministerial campaign, there was already an increasing chorus of people and charities saying this help really has to be targeted. I think it's quite a tough balancing act, actually, in terms of how she spends the money and actually whether that's money the government spends or whether it essentially comes from us over a period of many years.
Thank you very much indeed for being with us. That's very good of you to spend your time. Sarah Pennell's Consumer Finance Specialist at Royal London. And we can also talk now to Mark Spencer, Leader of the House of Commons and Conservative MP. And I think you have said that you are happy that Liz Truss has been elected leader. But she was elected leader with relatively few votes, certainly fewer votes amongst the Tory party membership than leaders in the last few years have received.
Yeah, I think we've had a very healthy process. I think the membership have engaged with the debate. Clearly we had that competition and Liz won the competition. It's now time to get behind her as the new Prime Minister and support her as she brings forward her exciting agenda.
But 57% of the vote, I mean, it is fewer than the people that have been expected. It's actually, in terms of Tory party members, it's less than half.
Well, I think, the pollsters are the pollsters. They predicted these things. As a Conservative Party member, I've never met anybody who is a member who'd been interviewed or asked their opinion by those pollsters. So we can only take what they say at face value. I think what matters is we've had a democratic process. The whole of the parliamentary party and the membership have been able to engage in that process. And that's resulted in a Liz Truss win.
Would you expect her to bring in members of Parliament from across across the party of all political persuasions? In other words, Sunak supporters as well as her own supporters into her government.
I'm sure she's looking at that now, that the Conservative Party is a very deep pool of talent. There'll be lots of talented people on those benches that she can call on, and she'll be forming her government as we speak. And I know that she'll reach out across the parliamentary party to try and make sure she embraces that talent.
All right, Mark Spencer, Leader of the House of Commons, thank you very much indeed. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Just to confirm, we've had it confirmed from our colleagues at BBC Westminster that Priti Patel has resigned as Home Secretary. Certain degree of, well, perhaps not huge surprise with that, because it is widely anticipated that she wasn't going to be Home Secretary or a senior member of Liz Truss's government. But we'll keep an eye on that and bring you any other developments from Westminster now, though it's the weather with Darren Beck.